o'clock, so I will call the meeting to order at 10 o'clock and would ask that you join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Before we go into the prayer, obviously our President Narducci is not with us here today. We have some sad news. His mother-in-law passed, I believe it was last night, and she was a second grade teacher for Tucson Unified for 32 years, and I believe was in the same classroom Luke shared for 26 of those 32 years. So she touched many, many lives, as all teachers do, and she will be missed. So with that, I would ask our prayer by Mr. James Wright from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Mr. Wright.
Thank you. Our Heavenly Father, this morning we bow our heads in gratitude for our many blessings that we know come from Thy hand. We're grateful to be gathered together. We're grateful for this Board of Education. We pray that Thy Spirit will rest with them. Please bless them collectively and individually as they guide the affairs of education for our children and young adults and all who participate in the learning process in our state. And please bless our children, watch over them. Bless those in particular this day who are encountering particular challenges. We are grateful, Father, for the many good things that happens in our classrooms. We're grateful for the teachers who teach and inspire our children. Please help us to do our best, Father, to do Thy will in all things. And again, we pray that this will be a productive meeting. Again, please bless this board as they make so many decisions that affect so many for good. And these things we pray for humbly and in the name of Thy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Mr. Wright. Ms. Becerra, can we get the roll call?
Yes. President Narducci?
Here.
Vice President Kaur?
Here.
Superintendent Hoffman?
Here.
Member Broussard? Member Baker?
Here.
Member Chang?
Here, on the phone.
Member Kay?
Here.
Member Mack?
Here.
Member Burton?
Here.
Member Ruiz?
Present.
Member Wellborn?
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. Luke, I know you're with us by phone. Do you have any report or anything you'd like to share?
No report, but thank you, Dr. Kaur, for that announcement. Appreciate it very much.
Sure. Superintendent, your report, please.
Good morning and happy beginning of fall. I know we certainly felt the fall weather this morning, so I'm glad that everyone made it here safely this morning through the flash flooding warnings. I'd first like to recognize that our meeting takes place on the traditional lands of the O'odham, Yavapai, and Hohokam people. And we're going to also start this morning by recognizing some outstanding educators who are receiving the prestigious Presidential Award for Excellence in Math and Science Teaching. The finalists will move forward to a national level. Those who are selected as the awardees for this honor are a premier group of highly qualified teachers who have both deep content knowledge of the subjects they teach and the ability to motivate and enable students to be successful in these content areas. Collectively, they reflect the expertise and the dedication of the nation's teaching corps, and they demonstrate the positive impact of excellent teaching on student achievement. Our 2019 finalists for the Presidential Award for Excellence in Mathematics Teaching are, and I'm actually going to go down here to announce all the teachers. All right, and Sarah Sleesman is going to help us present these awards. So the first for Excellence in Mathematics Teaching is Linnea Baum, who teaches at Campo Verde High School and Gilbert Public Schools. She currently teaches Honors Algebra 2, AP Calculus AB, and BC. Next is Kim Thomas, who teaches at Moon Valley High School in the Glendale Union High School District, who currently teaches geometry and AP BC Calculus.
Thank you very much.
And next is Melissa Wendell, who teaches at Mountain Point High School in the Tempe Union High School District, who currently teaches engineering. You're welcome to come up to take pictures. Our 2019 finalists for the Presidential Award for Excellence in Secondary Science Teaching are first Pandora Lenartz, who teaches at Sunny Slope High School in Glendale Union High School District, and she teaches biology at multiple different levels. And last is Christine Mendoza, who teaches at Las Brisas Academy in Liberty Elementary School District, and she teaches 7th through 8th grade general science. Congratulations. You're welcome to come up here too.
Shy group.
And I want to again thank you all for your hard work and dedication to high quality academic instruction. Our students and schools are lucky to have your passion and expertise. We greatly value our math and science teachers. Next, moving on. At the beginning of September, I declared for the month of September to be Suicide Prevention Month. Suicide and mental health struggles increasingly infect our students and communities. I know that many of us have personally been affected by suicide. Just this last week, an administrator who I spoke with in rural Arizona shared with me that already at this point in the school year, already 6 of his students have experienced a suicide amongst their family members. Later today, we will hear from a local high school student, Amelia Pascara, who has advocated for suicide prevention resources at her school after her classmate died by suicide when she was 15. You might have also noticed our yellow ribbons and yellow to recognize this month, September, as Suicide Prevention Month for our schools. Our educators and students are already grappling with mental health issues which affect the whole community. We need to provide educators with appropriate resources and have open, honest conversations about suicide and mental health. Earlier this month, Governor Ducey also signed the Mitch Warnock Act, which will provide all educators with suicide prevention training to help them understand how to best serve a student experiencing a mental health challenge. To continue helping guide the conversation around suicide prevention, we are making a proclamation today, and this proclamation serves a reminder that conversations around student mental health and well-being and providing those in need with resources is critical in preventing suicides. We are joining other agencies as I will now read the proclamation. Whereas suicide is a major public health issue with more than 123 deaths per day that requires vigilant attention and preventative action. The Arizona Department of Education stands in solidarity with our cities, school districts, counties, community partners, and families to bring awareness to this issue. Suicide is the second leading cause of death amongst those ages 12 to 18, and the third leading cause of death amongst those ages 18 to 30. And whereas each suicide directly impacts numerous family members, friends, loved ones, and by extension, the entire community. And whereas the Arizona Department of Education is committed to raising awareness, providing education, and training on suicide prevention and reducing stigma. And whereas the Arizona Department of Education is committed to ensuring that those in need have access to services by healthcare providers trained in best practices to reduce suicide risk and to reducing the stigma associated with using behavioral health treatment or losing a loved one to suicide. And whereas the Arizona Department of Education encourages anyone thinking of taking their own life seek the assistance they need by calling the National Suicide Hotline or text the crisis text line, or if you're a teenager, you can also call 1-800-248-8336. And whereas no single suicide prevention effort will be sufficient or appropriate for all populations or communities, all are asked to join together to take a stand to help those who are contemplating suicide. And whereas September 1st through 30th is recognized across the United States as Suicide Prevention Month and provides the opportunity to educate oneself about warning signs and how best to help those most in need. Now, therefore, be it proclaimed by the Arizona State Superintendent, myself, Kathy Hoffman, on this day in September, that the month of September 2019 be declared Suicide Prevention Month throughout Arizona schools. To support our schools in their suicide prevention efforts, the Arizona Department of Education offers free youth mental health trainings to schools and educators. And so we did provide these lovely flyers. We have them by the door if you didn't have one on your way in. And this is to share the resources that our department offers, including information about the youth mental health first aid training and the hotlines that I mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent Hoffman. And congratulations to all the remarkable educators recognized today. Executive Director's Report. Director Williams, report.
Vice President Core, Superintendent Hoffman, members of the board. First update is just board staff activities. We do have staff and board members attending both the NASB annual conference and the NASDEC annual conference in October. The NASDEC conference is going to focus on some certification and professional practices topics. NASB will be held in Nebraska, and we'll be focusing on just board development. Board staff will provide an update to the board at the October State Board meeting on those two conferences. The second item under my report is an update on educator discipline improvement, statutory and board actions. This comes from the board's retreat item on educator discipline. You'll notice in the agenda today, there is an agenda item asking the board to open rulemaking on summary suspensions. We will discuss that when we get to that item. The second thing I would like to share with the board is that board staff, as well as the chief investigator from the Department of Education, have already been on some presentation tours. Garnett Burns, who's our project director of enforcement actions, and chief investigator Spellich, recently went out to Dysart by the request of Dr. Quinn Kellis, who is the superintendent in Dysart. They spoke to the administrative staff of Dysart, both Dr. Quinn Kellis and other administrators who I had seen at GovEMAC meetings and whatnot, spoke very highly of Project Director Burns and Chief Investigator Spellich, very highly of their presentation, and they felt like they gained a lot of knowledge that they were not aware of, and we actually have another presentation to teachers in October, so I'll give you an update about that presentation at the October board meeting. I've also been going to GuppyMac meetings and speaking with superintendents and school administrators, so I would suspect that we will be getting many more calls to come and speak to their school districts and charters, so that's very exciting. The last thing, one of the agenda items that we discussed at the retreat was looking at some type of registry for non-certified educators, and that would be your non-certified teachers, both at the district and charter levels, coaches, and student teachers. Through some recent work that board staff has been doing with the department staff, we've come to determine that when any of those non-certified personnel go and receive a fingerprint clearance card, there's actually an educator ID number that's generated at the Department of Education. So what we think right now is that no registry would need to be created. It's something that the board would just need to seek in next legislative session the authority to take action on a non-certified personnel's EIN number. That's an educator ID number. We're still in discussions with that. We're drafting some legislation, and we hope to have that before you in October, so we can seek a sponsor and then go from there in the leg session 2020. And with that, that concludes my report.
Thank you, Director Williams. So now we move on to the call to the public. This is the time for the public to speak on items not on the agenda or items on the consent portion of today's agenda. So, Director Williams, have we received any requests to speak?
Dr. Core, members of the board, we've received 3 calls to the public for item 2. First up is Amaya Bascara. I apologize if I mispronounced that. And next is Linda Williamson.
Thank you to the Board of Education for having me, and thank you to Superintendent Hoffman for inviting me to speak at this meeting. My name is Amulia Bhaskara, and I am a senior at Paradise Valley High School. My freshman year, I decided to join the debate team, and I met an amazing senior who became my mentor. He navigated me through the 6 a.m. tournaments and the 12 a.m. prep. His help and friendship made jumping into high school a little less intimidating. He was always there whenever I needed him. But little did I know he really needed our help. In April, we found out that our friend had committed suicide. I remember feeling numb the moment I heard, and the tears only came once the shock that I would never see him again wore off. I wondered, had I known the warning signs of suicide, could I have helped him? This ordeal opened my eyes to how little we knew about the realities of mental illness. The stigma surrounding suicide made it a taboo topic. Since that fateful spring, I have advocated for suicide awareness by forming an advocacy club in my school to bring these issues up to my school district. I revealed to them the toll of a single suicide on a community and started a district-wide fundraiser to raise money and support for the Arizona Foundation for Suicide Prevention. We partnered with Bring Change to Mind, a California mental health nonprofit, to start positivity campaigns throughout the year. My initiatives have helped students and faculty in my school learn basic signs of mental illness and how to offer support to those in need. By setting the foundation for this dialogue, we became more open to discussing these issues. However, there are still thousands of students in our very state struggling through these problems with no real way of understanding them. As a student, I've seen just how far a little education goes in remedying this, which is why I am here asking you to invest in a formal mental health education for all students in Arizona. The initiatives currently being taken to educate teachers is a fundamental first step, but this knowledge is vital for the entire school community. Help me honor my friend's memory and the memory of all those lost to suicide by addressing this gap in our education system. Because if we can save even one life, it'll all be worth it. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Linda Williamson, followed by Brandon Biggs.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Linda Williamson. I am passionate about preventing suicide. Due to personal family experiences and devastating effects of suicide on families, friends, and our students. I am a social worker, and part of my assessment on a daily basis is suicide ideations and the subsequent treatment of persons that are contemplating suicide. I have 2 grown daughters who attended public education in the Paradise Valley School District, and I'm very proud of their contributions in the community in their chosen fields. Both have their masters, and one is about to complete her doctorate. I am a volunteer with the Moms Demand Action. We first want to thank Kathy Hoffman and the board for recognizing Suicide Prevention Month and your focus on training teachers to identify the signs of suicide. Nearly 40% of child gun deaths are suicide. That is almost 600 child gun suicides every year. Over 80% of our children under the age of 18 who died by gun suicide use guns belonging to parents or relatives. Research shows that responsible firearm storage is associated with decreased risk of child firearm suicide. Responsible gun storage affects the safety of our children in school. We ask the board to consider the public campaign promoting gun safety storage in honor of Suicide Prevention Month, as well as part of the board's priority in keeping our schools safe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Lastly, we have Brandon Biggs.
Thank you so much, Board. My name is Braden Biggs. I live in Pinal County. In 2012, I lost a sibling to suicide. My family spent the entire weekend with him, and 2 days later, that Tuesday morning, we found out that he killed himself. And to this day, we still don't have answers as to why. That's something that no family should ever have to go through. And I look back at the previous 2 speakers, and I thank them for speaking up, standing up, especially the high school student for actually doing something so impactful in our schools. Something that I've been working on here in Pinal County over the last 3 years is ensuring that the suicide prevention hotline information is on the back of all student ID cards in Pinal County, and my eventual goal is to take that statewide. I've been working with our Pinal County School Superintendent, Jill Broussard, as well as all of our school superintendents across Pinal County, our school boards, our local legislators, and everything to make that happen. September being a uniquely situated situation, given the fact that it is Suicide Prevention Month. I've gone to each one of our communities and asked that they, just like you, signed on to the Suicide Proclamation. And I'm proud to say that in Pinal County, not only has our Board of Supervisors signed on, but the cities of Apache Junction, Superior, Florence, Coolidge, Casa Grande, and Maricopa have all signed on, and we are rallying behind this, as well as our school districts are rallying behind this as we look to take this to a statewide level. I do want to encourage anybody who is thinking about committing suicide to call the National Suicide Hotline number at 1-800-273-8255. Or if you're a teenager, you can call 1-800-248-8336. Thank you all so much for your dedication to this issue.
Thank you very much.
Vice President, core members of the board, that concludes the first call to the public.
Thank you. So we'll move on to number 3, the consent agenda. My understanding is that Member Burton would like to pull item 3A, as well as Member Wellborn pulling item 3B. Do any other members of the board wish to pull an item off the consent agenda? Okay, then hearing none, do I have a motion to approve items 3C through 3G?
So moved.
Second.
I have a first and second. So no discussion. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, then we'll circle back to item 3A, and Member Burton.
Vice President Corr, Superintendent Hoffman. So my concern about the athletic coach training, it's been in the news a lot. We have some concerns about, there's just been a lot of, I think, unprofessional conduct in the coaching field. And I guess my concern is whether or not this particular program has been sufficiently vetted. I understand the AAA says it's a good program, but I think I would like to see more information on this. Specifically, if it includes like a professional ethics training unit. I think that's, or a coaching code of conduct or something that can give us confidence that the coaches are understanding what the responsibility is. And then my other question is, are assistant coaches also required to complete this training? So I don't know if other members have concerns about this, but I certainly do.
Member Wellborn.
Thank you, Dr. Corr, members of the board. I concur with some of the points that you raised. And I would like to add on to it that it's not clear to me what the coaching requirements are from the state. In the materials we have here, it says these are sample courses meeting athletic coaching requirements. However, it's not clear, for example, the 3 items at the bottom with regard to bullying, creating a safe and respectful environment. Are these required requirements of the program or not? So I think it would be helpful, in addition to adding the ethics piece, to know what actually does the state require and how does a particular provider meet those requirements?
Yes, Member Ruiz.
Vice President Corr, Superintendent Hoffman, and members, to answer a couple of the questions, provide some context. So one, the athletic coaching certificate is an optional certificate, so it is not required for coaches to have, and I think that probably goes to assistant coaches as well, because the athletic coaching certificate is optional. Assistant coaches or any other people who may help there is also optional. And that's something that the board owns. So statute does not make a distinction about whether or not it is or is not required. So the board has, some authority over that. As to the requirements for the certificate and how actually this agenda item came up, the requirements are listed out in statute, in board rule, and it's valid certification of CPR, and it also mentions completion of courses, board-approved or accredited seminars or modules of study, which include methods of coaching, anatomy and physiology, sports physiology, prevention and treatment of athletic injury and signs of physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, bullying, hazing, and cyberbullying. And then there's also some verified coaching experience requirements, as well as a fingerprint clearance card. Part of the reason this came forward is we had a denial appeal of a certificate application for somebody who had some AIA courses, and they wanted to use those. Well, the board had never, to our knowledge, adopted any modules of study as required by the rule. Now, that individual still was deficient, even if those courses were to be included, and so their denial went through. But that was part of the reason that the department worked on some of this item, and I don't mean to speak for Bruce, who's looking up some additional notes, but that's why that item came back to us today. So I think to maybe circle back to Member Burton's point about some of the things that were potentially in the news recently about immoral or unprofessional conduct, those are probably things we would have to adjust the rule to do rather than this agenda item, because the agenda item is trying to reflect the rule. And if that is the case that the board would want to go down, I think we would probably advise continuing to adopt what's in front of us today, but then asking the Certification Advisory Committee to research that rule. And then also, of course, a big reason AIA is here as a recommended approval body is because they're the ones who provide most, if not all, of the coursework, and so we'd want to make sure that they could accommodate, or there are others who could accommodate what our new rule requirements would be, and that there's capacity for it. So I hope that answers questions. I don't know if I'm looking over at ADE to see if I missed anything or said anything wrong, but that's kind of where staff is at in response to some of those points, valid points that were brought up.
Member Wellborn.
Dr. Kaur, thank you, and Deputy Director Baden, thank you for that information. Does it make sense then to postpone a vote on this particular application until further definition is provided to the board rule, or is the recommendation to go ahead and approve this and then later on take the time necessary to provide further definition to what's required?
Dr. Kaur, Member Wellborn, the latter.
Thank you.
Member Ruiz, did you have a?
Yeah, Vice President Kaur and Superintendent Hoffman and members, I have an AIA certification for coaching. Did that some time ago, and it's excellent. If you want to be a coach in Arizona, you have to do the introduction to coaching. That's 40 hours, and it's intense. And they do the whole portion on safety, Arizona, the heat. And the one thing that they added to this component, I think it was about 3 years ago, was the whole section on hazing, bullying, sexual abuse. And if without that, then there's nothing. It's just everybody's free to choose whatever standard they want to use. With that, if you want to do AIA, you have to go through that whole regimen of courses. You have Charter School Association, the Athletic Association, and they don't have the same requirements. So if you adopt something, I think it's really, really excellent. We have all our coaches do that. It's intense. It's an intense certification process. So better to have that and then build on it and amend it than not have anything.
Member Broussard, did you have a comment?
Yeah, actually, I would definitely like to reopen or open the rulemaking for the athletic coaching certificate or endorsement of the certificate. Okay.
Other thoughts? Member Cake? Yeah.
Yes. Dr. Kaur, Superintendent Hoffman, members, I had some of the similar concerns, but I think if the solution is to address it through opening the rule, yeah, I think that's definitely in order. And then as Member Ruiz points out, I think we've got a number of schools, particularly charters, that are operating in an entirely different system, which is something that we're going to have to take up with the rule as well.
Member Mack.
Superintendent Hoffman, members of the board, perhaps as we're considering opening rulemaking, I would encourage us to maybe collect some data on how many do we have that actually have this, coaching certification, what is their background, and the other thing is I'm just noticing this course here is aligned to the national standards for sports coaches that was passed in here. It's aligned to the 2006, so I'm assuming there has been no further version passed. And I'm assuming even with opening rulemaking, we're going to want to choose a course that aligns to these standards in any case. And so they're pretty comprehensive, and they do cover everything from fiscal to hazing to a lot of aspects of it. So just to point that out. But I think data is important to start with, and maybe feedback from the field.
All right, then I would entertain a motion to approve item 3A with the concerns noted in the minutes moving forward, but I would look for a motion to approve item 3A.
So moved.
And a second? Did I hear a second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Any opposed? Thank you. Item 3B, Member Wellborn.
Thank you, Dr. Kaur, Superintendent, members of the board. My reason for pulling this item is just to ask for some more clarity around it. It appears that the funding request is intended to provide additional funding on top of what I would assume is already regular funding, and that this additional funding is for professional development of staff. However, when I look at the attachment, in this document, it appears more that the funding is going directly to Pima Community College and Rio Salado College. So my question is it for professional development for ADE staff in the program, or is this funding going to these institutions for a broader or a different purpose? I'm not clear.
Superintendent Hoffman and board members, thank you very much. I brought Janice Cruz, our Director of Fiscal Services for Adult Education. But the answer to that is this allocation goes to those entities for them because they have staff members on staff, and it's for PD4. It's not for the Department of Education. It's for those two entities to provide PD to their students based on capacity. And Janice, if you want to explain that further.
So this is additional professional development allocation out to our two largest adult education providers in the state. They will be participating in a professional development project. They have 2 full-time teachers from from both programs that will be conducting this year-round professional development. So it's allocation out to them for professional development, not for the ADE staff.
So it's training for the instructional staff at these educational institutions for them to provide
their local
adult education services.
Mm-hmm.
And how many people will receive the training for the $20,000?
There are 2 full-time staff from each of Pima Community College and Rio Salado College that are currently receiving professional development through the national level, and they will conduct those trainings down towards staff within their organization as well as throughout the state.
So am I clear in understanding that 2 people will benefit from this training?
There's actually 4.
4
There's
people.
2 from each provider.
So we're providing, for $20,000, we're providing training for 4 people.
It is training. It's training for 2 face-to-face in Washington, D.C. with the Office of Career and Technical and Adult Education, which is provided through AIR. So.
Okay, but am I correct
in
in
addition to
understanding
that,
that it's $20,000 for 4 people to be trained?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'm sorry, am I misunderstanding the benefit? Then the benefit then is that these 4 people then will reach out and...
They will conduct additional training to the other 20 providers that we fund currently throughout the whole state of Arizona.
Okay, so the trickle-down effect will be an additional 20 people?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Hold on. And any other questions? Okay, thank you. Do I have a motion to approve item 3B?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second. Either one.
I'll call it Member Burton by a whisker. Any other questions or discussion? All in favor of approving item 3B indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed?
Aye.
Dr. Chang, that was a vote to approve?
It was a vote to approve. I was on mute, so I was talking to myself first.
Thank you very much. Any opposed? Okay, thank you very much. We will move on to item 4. Once again, a call to the public. And remember, this is the time for the public to comment on items on today's general session. So, Executive Director Williams, have we received any interest in folks talking to us?
Dr. Core, members of the board, there is no interest from the audience to speak with the board on this agenda item today.
Nobody all showed up and no one wants to talk to us. Okay, then with that, we will not take it personally and move on to the general session, and that would be item 5A. Presentation and discussion regarding accountability cut scores for the 18-19 school year, and this is for information only. Director Williams.
Dr. Corr, Superintendent Hoffman, members of the board, you are correct. This is for information only. The board will take action on this agenda item at the October State Board meeting. Presenting this today is Wendy Davey, the Chief Accountability Officer from the Department of Education, and then I'll probably join in when needed.
Very good. Thank you. Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you, Dr. Corr, Superintendent Hoffman, board members. We appreciate you looking this over today. This is hot. Literally hot off the press. A couple of these items we're showing you today. As it said in the write-up, we do have additional support material that is, again, going to be provided to the public when they provide input, at least 9 pages for an easy read. So I'm just going to go ahead and jump into this. This is our first look at cut scores. So we're going to start with K-8, and with K-8 we looked at keeping the scores the same. Again, looking at standard deviation, and because we're always asked, we always look at the 90, 80, 70. I'm going to go through the next slides pretty quickly because what it is, it's nicer when they're comparing and sitting right next to each other. Last year we were asked to make sure that we modeled without the bonus score. So some of these may look a little bit lower, but when we get to it, I'll show you, you can see the difference. So this is letter grades using the fiscal year 18 cut scores. So that would mean keeping nothing, changing nothing, keeping them as is. If we reset using standard deviation, using the process that we've used in the past, these are the second set that we're showing you today. And last but not least is the 70, 80, 90 or 90, 80, 70. It depends which one of us is putting the PowerPoint together, which direction it goes. So here is the first one that has the comparison. This is without bonus points. So the purple one over here on the far right, that is how many A's, B's, C's, and D's were last year after appeals and with bonus. So naturally it seems quite a bit higher. And you have your number of A's here. So the first one is keeping it the same. The red one is resetting at standard deviation, and then the 90, 80, 70. Okay, so I'll give you a second to look at that. And the one that is most telling is the one I'm going to go to next. And this is where you can sort of have each one side by side. So the first one here is the fiscal year 18 cut scores. What we did for this in 9-12 is we just put an overlay. So this is what it is without bonus points. This little overlay shows what it would be once we add the bonus points back in. Over here is what the final of 18 was. So this is what it is without the bonus points. Here it is, keeping it the same. As you can see, there's not a major difference. We're talking 396 to 398 by keeping the scores the same. And we can look at it a little bit deeper if you choose. Here's standard deviation, and then our 70, 80, 90 model. And I'm going to stop at this point, give you a second to look that over and let you know if you have any questions. If not, I'll jump into 9-12 and...
Any questions? Superintendent Hoffman.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Vice President, members of the board. Hi, Wendy.
Good morning.
Good morning. So can you, I just want to make sure I'm understanding all the charts. And so can you explain why, if last year it was 398 schools that were A schools, then why does it go to 261 if we're keeping things consistent? That seems like a big jump.
It does. Good question. Let me clarify for you. 398 was after the bonus points and after the appeals, so it was a final letter grade. The 261 is before we put in the bonus points and before any appeals. Just putting in the bonus point does move us up to 396, and that would be before appeals.
Okay.
Yeah, Member Mack, I'm sorry.
Dr. Corr,
Member
Superintendent Hoffman, members. So we received a letter from someone who's advocating for gifted and talented. Mm-hmm. Just for my clarification, was the formula changed last year to include for the 8th grade test, students could take the 8th grade test and end of course assessments if they were accelerated? Or has that always been in the formula? I couldn't recall.
Vice President Core, Member K, it was the same last year. There was no changes. The 8th grade could take whatever EOC they were taking, and they would be applied both to the high school and the elementary as long as the enrollments were done correctly. So there was no change. That would be, and we'll speak about that, I think, in the next 3 agenda items up, what impact that may have on fiscal year 20.
Okay. So no changes to last year's formula?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Yeah, Member Wilmore.
Thank you, Dr. Kaur, Superintendent Hoffman, and Wendy. Thank you. Can you just remind us the logic that the board employed for going with what the modified standard deviation approach versus the actual standard deviation approach?
I got it. Dr. Kaur, Member Wellborn. So last year, the board voted to utilize the 16-17 cut scores again for the 17-18 letter grades because we heard from the field that it was important to provide consistency within that cut score. That is one reason why you're also seeing the cut scores again in that first set of graphs. Keeping the cut score at the same level allows for schools in the field to know what the end line is. Right. The board originally set the cut score utilizing the standard deviation, hence why you still see the standard deviation cut scores ran as well. Ultimately, the board voted to keep the cut scores the same for the reasons that I have already spoken of.
Please.
Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to 912. It's following the same pattern. So, well, nice little table for anybody sitting at home. The K-8 aggregated scores for review. They would be able to look at some of their scores by using this table. The 912 letter grade model, again, now the 912 is different this year, so let me preface that. The growth didn't go away, but we went into subgroup improvement for graduation, dropout, and proficiency. So this actually will look quite a bit different than it did last year, but there was a good distribution. So this is using the FY18 state score. So we use the same cut scores that they had last year. Then we also did a standard deviation model. And then we did the 90, 70, 80, 90. I'm going to find out who on my team flipped those on me because I'm the one that goes 90, 80, 70. Here is your comparison. So as you can see here again, the purple one to the far right for each of these are the letter grades as they were last year. After appeals, after the bonus points. All of these in here are before the bonus points. Mm-hmm. So when I get to the next slide, I'll give you a little bit background. Our technical advisory committees have been working, and the reason you're stuck with me is because this is so hot off the press that I couldn't do nose goes with any of them in time. So what we're looking at here is over here is the actual 18 scores. You do see a drop, and you can see that here because this is without bonus points, and this is if we add bonus points in. Our initial analysis is what we're finding is the subgroup is doing a good job of differentiating the scores, but they're not achieving all of that 20 points as much as you did when you had the growth in there. Mm-hmm. So there was a good distribution with growth as well, but it was a little bit more of the available 20, where the subgroup it's differentiating well, but it's a little bit lower, not capturing all the 20, and that's consistent across the board. So here you have the F18 scores, redoing standard deviation, the 70, 80, 90 model, and then the fiscal year 18. The brief conversations that we got to have, all these were hot off the press with the technical advisory committee, is if we stay with the current model or the cut scores as is, you can see we got a difference here between 75 and 72 that may provide some consistency, but there's also able to look at it from a standard deviation because it is a new model. So we were hoping to get feedback and directions while all along we're looking at the demographic impact, not only between the free and poverty indicators, charter versus non-charter, and the school size, but also we're going back and looking to see if there's a big difference between 18 scores and 19 scores. So we're about 85% through that work. And I can take questions.
Yeah, Member Wilburn.
Wendy, I believe I'm correct in saying that in the 912 model, 20% of the points are in the bonus. Compared to K8, it's 10%. Is that correct?
You mean the available bonus points?
Yes, available bonus.
And
So
I do believe, and I wish behind me was Shannon was sitting, I believe there's 6 bonus points available in K8 where there's only 5, I believe, in 912. But let me check on that and get back to you.
But for the 912, doesn't the CCRs represent 20 points?
Oh, I'm sorry. That is college and career readiness versus acceleration readiness. I was actually looking at bonus.
So when you say it's without bonus, of the 100%, how many are being excluded?
In the bonus, what we're talking about is just excluding the bonus, is not excluding college and career ready.
Okay,
That
so
is
that's
in there.
That's in there. All right.
It's
thank
those
you.
little extra points that you're
Little
getting
extra.
here and there.
So for elementary, it's 6 points, and for
Acceleration readiness at elementary is 10 points.
Okay.
And CCRI in high school is 30.
No, it's 20. It's
20. Gosh, I am so sorry.
I'm
guys.
sorry. Now I've completely done a circle in my mind here.
I've got that circle.
Okay, when you were writing up here that it's
That is
without
so bad, I
bonus
apologize.
points, in the elementary model, we're talking a possible maximum bonus points of 6. And the number for high school, the possible maximum number of bonus is?
I'm going to get back with you. I believe it's 5.
Okay. So I just wanted to know what the impact, what we're talking 5 points out of 100, or is it 5 points out of 105?
It's out of 100, but remember, if you only qualify for 90 of the points, you would.
So it's adjusted based on what
Correct.
you qualified. Thank you. Very
The
helpful.
bonus points this year, remember, we voted on that in the spring. That bonus points are added after the calculation
Right.
and put back on top.
Right. And then you also have data on the CCR component of the framework, what the distribution of the point spread is on that?
On it, yes, we gathered significant data this year on CCRI, and when you're ready and by your request in the board, we could share that data with
Great.
you.
Thank you for your help.
You're requesting that data, aren't you?
I believe we already did when
Okay.
he's saying it. So
Okay.
when what's your timeline expectation on sharing that information?
Whenever you're ready, we're ready.
All right, can I ask?
We were excited. We got new data.
So can I ask the staff to follow up on that, please? Thank you.
Yes, Member Kay.
Vice President Corr, Superintendent Hoffman, members. Wendy, just going back to the survey, so I'm looking at the executive summary. Looks like the additional modeling will be released with the survey in just a couple of days. Will that include movement within the letter grade? So seeing particularly drops at the 9-12 level. If a school was an A last year and they went to a B or a B to a C, will we have any detailed information on the factors or characteristics of those schools that dropped other than their scores? Is there a way to do that?
Member Kay, we can add that right now. We are just looking at the demographics. Like I said, poverty and those indicators. We could actually do the movement.
Okay.
Up in whether you can see most people will go down per se, looking at the two models. But
Sure.
remember, this year was also you retain your higher of your 2
Right.
grades.
Right.
So we'll give you the table if that's not in place or if that's in place.
Okay.
Both.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions?
Vice President Corr,
Yeah,
Superintendent
Member
Hoffman,
Mack.
members. Wendy, to your last point regarding remodeling the 912 using standard deviation because it is a new system, I would say I think that would be good to see just how that looks.
Okay. Just to clarify, standard deviation model, we did run that. That is the second one here. Okay. So if I move on forward, you also have the table of the 3 possible cut scores. Some of that data will be available to schools this week on the individual components for 912. And if there's no questions, I'll go ahead and bring up the alternative. Okay, brand new. Okay, no carryover, first time doing this. Sent this probably late Friday afternoon, so even our alternative people have got to look at it over the weekend, and we have those demographic breakdowns that'll be made available this afternoon as well, as far as charter, poverty, and school size. So this was the first one, so we went ahead and used fiscal year 18 high school cut scores. For consistency purposes, whether you're an alternative high school or you are a traditional high school, this would be using the same cut scores. And those would go back to the fiscal year 18. The next one is applying standard deviation fresh with the scores as they currently are. And again, these are all without bonus point. And then our 70, 80, 90. Here is the letter grade comparison across the models without bonus. And here is a letter grade comparison across the models with a bonus. Okay. This one's more telling, the next two. Here is the traditional, the standard deviation in the 780, 90s. This is without bonus. And I know this is presented slightly different, but I had a couple people helping me on it, and this is with bonus. So you don't have that really quick overlay, but you do have it here. So this would be with bonuses, what that would be like. So I will take your direction as which one you prefer to look at and ask questions from. We do see a good distribution. We were looking at all the components and how those were playing out across each individual component. It does look like we are getting some good distribution. The AA TAC team is definitely already hard at work thinking of suggestions and improvements, because this is the first year and we want to keep that in mind, some things that might be tweaked and improved moving on, and we can talk about that for fiscal year 20, because I don't want to get sidetracked with what we have currently. This is currently using the business rules as they are for the alternative model. And I stand for questions.
Any thoughts or questions? Seeing and hearing none? Oh, I'm sorry, Member Baker.
Just a comment that, when we started this whole process, one of the standards that people spoke of frequently is that any school should have the opportunity or the option to get an A grade. And implicit in that recommendation is that there be some standardization from one year to the next. If we go with anything resembling a standard deviation year by year, then if I'm a C school, if I keep getting better, but the A schools get better at the same rate, I'm stuck. So I may improve, do some valiant work, but not be recognized because my placement in the group didn't change. I don't think that was the intent at all when we set out on designing the system. We wanted to say, all right, here's what you have to do to get to an A, and it's well defined, everybody knows, so if you figure out a way to get to that point, you're going to get an A. It's not going to disappear over the horizon.
Dr. Corr.
Thoughts or questions?
Dr. Corr, members of the
Please.
board, Wendy was discussing this, but just so the board members know, the additional modeling that goes into the school size, school type, and poverty levels will be included in a survey that we will send out by Wednesday of this week. Jessica has already been hard at work on Friday taking these slides and putting it into a survey so that you have the field survey responses in front of you come the October meeting when you have to make a choice.
Thank you.
And if we go, we have the table there as well for the field to use. And that covers the K-8, 9-12, and alternative cut score modeling for A through F. So if you don't have any other questions that I can help you with at this point.
All of us, again, that the timeline between now and we'll vote in October, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Thoughts, questions?
Dr. Core?
Yeah, Member Baker.
This, I don't know if this is directly related to cut scores, but well, I know it is related. I don't know if it's specific to this topic, but I raised the issue, I think you get a copy of my email, regarding the growth scores for subgroups and the reality that for small schools, they may not have access, or they likely are not going to have access to the same number of subgroups. And so there's a much more volatile situation in terms of scores with small schools, whether they be small traditional public schools or be small charter schools. And each subgroup, not only is there volatility because small schools don't have the same number to choose from, but also because the number of students in each subgroup is so much smaller. And so the suggestion was put forward, and I think your ATAC talked about it on Friday, and I'd like to hear what they had to say, that perhaps there should be a minimum number of subgroups before growth is a consideration. In other words, if there's such a small model that the score is going to be so very volatile, then maybe for smaller schools, subgroup growth should not be part of the formula.
Dr. Core, Member Baker, we can share some of those for fiscal year 20. We're doing a lot of analysis, and I might be able to elaborate a little bit more at the next item.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for all your work. We'll move on to item 5B, also for information only. This is the presentation and discussion of progress towards implementation of the board-adopted 5-year statewide assessment plan. Director Williams.
Dr. Core, 5B is in boy, correct? Yes?
Yes.
Okay. We have today Miss Audra from the Department of Education. She's the Deputy Associate Superintendent of Assessment, and so she's going to provide us an update on all of the RFPs that we're doing in relation to our 5-year assessment plan. This is an item that directly comes from the board retreat and the board's ask for these types of updates, so we're very excited to have Audra here with us today.
Please.
Vice President Core, Superintendent Hoffman, members, I'm happy to be here. It was great work for me to put this all together. It was a lot of work, but thinking, wow, we really have been doing a lot. So excited to share that with you all. So I just reminded, or it is a reminder of the 5-year plan. I really focused on the next 2 years as we're getting ready to roll out many new things. So I put this slide in there and kind of just, this is where our update will center around. So one of the requests was to update everything with our new name, so AZM2, and I took some screenshots to show you that that's been done not only in our website, but as well as the portal that we use for our AZM2. So our vendor updated all of those sites as well. And then we've also reached out to other entities in the agency and have said, hey, if you have documents, there's a name change. So we've been communicating that within the agency as well. And then for AZM2, we also brought in educators to finalize the high school math blueprints, and we did that in June, and we brought that to you a few months ago for your approval, our review of that, but that's what we've done for AZM2, so really keeping that moving forward, making sure that we've transitioned to that single grade assessment in grade 10 for ELA and mathematics. For overall achievement assessments, that includes AZM2 plus science. This team has worked with our vendor to prepare and create the 2019-2020 test forms with Arizona-developed items for both ELA and mathematics. That was something that you all had asked for, and we're making sure that we're getting more of our Arizona-developed items on those assessments. We're much closer in math than we are for ELA due to the way that the passages are written. We have a single passage with 4 or 5 questions. So it's that we just don't have enough passages to have all of those other items associated for Arizona-specific items. But we're working toward that. We've also reviewed batches of Arizona-developed items and reviewing our Braille form. So we have a Braille form for each of our assessments. So we've had to go through and look at all of those. We've reviewed about 90 items for our new 3-dimensional science prototype field test. And these include single items and item clusters, which will be new for our new science assessment. And that prototype will take place in January. I think I have some more slides about that. But that team has been very busy, not only developing these items, but reviewing them. I think we're turning, items around in a few days so that we can make sure that everything is reviewed before it gets in front of our students. We also had parent educator review committees in the summer to look at the science prototype field test items. So again, that's part of what we do, bringing in those parent and educator committees. We're also looking at new ways to generate people to get into our database for community members. Many of them are retired educators, which is great. They still represent our community, but we're also looking to get some businesses and working with schools, parent advocates or parent liaisons to get, other parents involved as well. For the menu of assessments, I wanted to give you an update. There are 135 LEAs that will be participating and administering ACT to their grade 11 students. That's about 65,000 students. Previous year, there was about 16% of our students participated in menu of assessments, and this year it's 76%. So we've seen a huge increase, largely due to more familiarity with this process and that we could early on confirm that the state would be paying to cover that assessment. So we saw a lot of increase there, which we're really excited about. We've been communicating with them. And with that new contract that we have with ACT to administer the many of assessments, we now have a more closely working relationship with ACT. So now, and on top of all the other vendor calls that I have weekly, we have our small team of 3 on weekly calls with ACT. And we're also communicating with them with emails that are going out to the districts that are participating. There's now a specific Arizona ACT page where before they would just go to national ACT and they'd have to navigate and figure out things. Because of our contract, we have an Arizona-specific ACT page, and we've also scheduled all the webinars that will be coming to talk about how to do this assessment, training that they'll have to complete for that, as well as accommodations, which is a huge piece and very different for ACT. So we have also determined through a survey of all of the menu of assessment schools, not all of them gave back the survey, but we sent it out to all of them asking which would be our state preferred test dates. So March 24th and April 7th were selected. And we have to do some really strong communication with everyone because unlike AZM2 or other state assessments where we have a lengthy test window, these are the only dates. And if you're a district that signs up for April 7th and you don't have your kids, there are no makeup dates. This is the end all be all. And so we just want to make sure that they're very clear on that. ACT has always been that way. When they were doing menu of assessments last year, there was one date and they knew that. With this year, we have 2. But we just want to make sure that they understand that because we have so many new LEAs participating. And I think I already talked about that, how closely now we're working with ACT on the website and then training module dates. Oh, let me just say one more thing about the training modules. So ACT offers them on select dates, but they're recorded, and they also have a component where it can be someone can watch it recorded, but they can ask a question, and it will go to our Arizona-specific ACT team for them to respond. So while it's not a live webinar, they can still ask questions and get those questions answered. So I think that's very helpful and new for our menu of assessments. For ELA and mathematics assessment RFP, we have set up webinar series where we're getting feedback on the scope of work for ELA and math. We have 3 webinar series. We've had one and we have one this week. On our first webinar series, we had over 100 people call in and give feedback. And we thought it was really productive. They commented that they liked that format. We did distinguish topics for each of the 3 webinars so that people could really be focused. And if you didn't care about those topics on that particular webinar, you didn't have to call in. But we did get a lot of feedback. We've also scheduled in-person webinar or in-person sessions to give feedback, and we're going to Amphi, we're going to Somerton, we're having one in Phoenix and one in Flagstaff. So we'll be traveling with our team around the month of October to have in-person sessions. So if people would like to come in person to give us their feedback, they can do that as well. The difference between the webinar series and the in-person is we'll only be there for about 2 hours so that we can get back over here, but that will be covering all of the topics for the scope of work instead of in the webinars, they were about 6 to 8 topics per webinar. I think I covered everything else. So there's a sign up for the in-person. We're asking them to sign up so we can be prepared. For the webinar, it's open to however many participants call in that day. For our new science assessment, we did complete the naming contest, and our new name, I'm happy to announce, is AZ Sci. That's it. Doesn't stand for anything. That is the name that was selected and submitted. So our new science assessment will just be AZ Sci. We are beginning the recruitment for our prototype field test. This is the first field test I've ever been involved in where we're getting people calling us and asking to be put on the list, and we haven't even advertised for that yet. Something else unique about the prototype field test is it's a shortened version. So they'll be seeing, I believe it's about 10 to 15 items or so. They won't be seeing a full test. So people are more excited that, yeah, I can take time away to participate in that. And so it'll be at the 3 grade levels. We've opened it to a whole district can sign up, a school can sign up, or even just a classroom. So it's going to be a lot of tracking on our end, but we really wanted this open to as many people that wanted to get excited about this new science assessment. So a little bit different than we've done in the past. For AZELA, which is our English Language Proficiency Assessment, we recently presented 2 breakout sessions at our PEL meeting, and we are facilitating with OLS an EL and special education task force to address some concerns that they have regarding a significant change to no longer having a special education student withdrawal as an option for AZELA. And so we are working on an FAQ that they've requested and a flow chart. And so those will be going back out to those task members after I've heard their feedback. They'll weigh in on that. And then we will be sharing that at the OLS conference in December. Test administrators. So this presentation was actually created about 2 weeks ago, and at that time 2 weeks ago we've already had 12,000 training modules completed for placement testing. So our teachers are out there busy completing those training modules so that they can administer AZELA during that placement time. Our team is also finalizing test forms for the opening of the 2020 AZELA, which takes place in February and March. So just a kind of insight into, that test is not till February, or AZM2 is not until April, but all of our test forms are being finalized this early on in preparation for printing, setting up, and getting all the materials ready. Something else that we're working on are cognitive labs. So I actually have the AZELA team out. They're at Chinley, they're at a Phoenix school, and I can't remember the name of it. I have so many names in my head. And they are going to, I think it's Crane, or somewhere on east, southeast side, or southwest, to conduct cognitive labs. And this is so exciting for us. We've never done cognitive labs. They're a very unique way to get information from students. So they get administered an item, and rather than just completing a test and getting statistics, we're actually asking them to talk about what they thought about that item. And then we have their test administrator also there giving us feedback. So it's a little bit different. It's a much smaller subset of students, but they'll be out for a whole week collecting data on a bunch of set of items. since we will be having significant changes to the Azella test, because it will be aligned to the new standards. So really excited about doing some new things in assessment as well. For alternate assessment, we recently had our contract awarded, which you all approved. So now the MSA states are very busy getting all of their contracts signed. This summer, they had an item review committee with about 100 educators from MSA states that gathered in Orlando, Florida. From Arizona, from each state, we have anywhere from 10 to 20 educators. So we flew those educators from Arizona out there to be a part of that as well. The MSA states are, again, finalizing all of their agreements and then collaborating on working on the 1% threshold, which was formerly known as the 1% cap, which only allows only 1% of students to participate in an alternate assessment. So the MSA states are collaborating and talking about what are you doing in your state to help address this issue? What kind of supports are you giving? So it's just another way for us to collaborate with other states across the nation. And just to save the date, we will be having our first annual assessments conference. So we have many conferences in our agency, but we just kind of would go and present at all the different ones. But we thought it was finally time. We have so many things happening and so much to share that we would have our first annual assessments conference. And that's going to be in September of 2020. So we're already beginning planning, and I have a wonderful team with that. But it will be titled the 2020 Arizona Assessments Conference, Integrating Assessment Standard and Accountability for Student Success. So we're just really, really excited about that work as well. And that's all I have to share, but I'm open here to take some questions if you have any. Of course. I really honest talking about the strands, like we want some of our TAC members to present. We just want different perspectives of how this all works together.
Any other questions? Yeah, Member Burton.
Dr. Core Superintendent Hoffman, Audra, the Arizona Psi test, is that aligned to our new science standards?
Vice President Core, Superintendent Hoffman, Member Burton, yes, it will be. And so this is really unique. There are several states out there that have designed a new science assessment, but this is our first opportunity with the new 3D standards. They are very complex. And another big change is that before we assess just fourth grade content in fourth grade, just eighth grade content in eighth grade. So while instruction was happening in all those grades, it was really only the content for that grade. In the new assessment, it will be a grade band. So we will be assessing content for everything from third grade, from everything up to fourth grade, and then from fourth to fifth grade. Third, fourth, and fifth, that'll be a small group, and then up to it's 5, not 4, 5, 8 in high school, and we'll be doing that at grade 11.
Great.
So it's a lot more content to be assessed versus how we used to do it.
But it's a shorter test, did you
It's
say?
not necessarily, the prototype field test is a shorter test, but the actual assessment when we are operational will be probably a little bit longer than what it is now because the standards are so different.
Right, okay.
But we're still trying to stay within that time frame that's requested by people of not spending hours and hours and hours.
It's a balance.
It's a balance. It always is, yes.
Great. Superintendent Hoffman.
Thank you, Vice President Core. I just want to acknowledge, Audra, under your leadership, all the great work you and your team are doing for engaging the community, engaging teachers and parents, having the webinars, the cognitive labs, the conference, the review committees. And could 2 questions. Could you share first, if people are interested in being on one of those committees, how can they find that information?
Sure. Vice President Core, Superintendent Hoffman, members. So we have our database. We have one for educators on our website, and we have one for community members. And so all we ask is they go put their information into that database. And then when we look to pull committee members, we're looking to have some experienced committee members so that we can keep those committees moving, and then bring on new either educators and or community members so that we can show them this process. We have seen once they're involved in this process, especially for educators, they say it really changes. I get goosebumps. It really changes their outlook on what does this assessment really mean. It's more than just some hours that kids are sitting there responding to something. It really changes their outlook on instruction. And so we want as many educators as we can to be a part of those committees.
Nice.
And I have a quick second question.
Of course,
with the new MSAA contract, do you expect there to be significant changes to that assessment?
Not significant changes to that assessment. The only thing I would say is that we're adding in a science option for states for the alternate assessment as well to be aligned to their state's science standards. So it's an option for states. Not all states are ready to do it, or some states an MSA went out early on. So not significant changes. We have brought in a national consultant, Diane Browder. She is an expert in the field of students with significant cognitive disabilities to look at how we write our items and give us some feedback. She works with a lot of schools in North Carolina, and she's well known. She's created instructional materials and to advise us on, are we hitting the mark on writing our items? Are we thinking about all the things we should be thinking about? And so we are consulting with her to how we're writing our items in the future.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Just on a personal note, I'm thrilled to see you come out to Somerton and Crane School District, see the magic that's occurring in Yuma County.
Yeah, well, we need to get a good picture of everyone, so thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you for
All
doing
right.
that. Thank you. Move on to item 5C, and this is the presentation, discussion, and possible action to update Board Policy 002, Assessment Values. Director Williams.
Dr. Quorum, Superintendent Hoffman, members of the board, I'm going to pass it over to Deputy Director Baden.
Dr. Quorum, Superintendent Hoffman, and members, item 5C is an update to the assessment values, the board adopted assessment values. The board saw this at the retreat and provided some feedback. The board also provided some additional feedback subsequent to that retreat, and staff worked on incorporating that into the document you have in front of you. We also worked with Audra and her team on items that they felt should be updated to reflect, frankly, just where we are in the current assessment system in terms of language, which has evolved since 2014 when this original document was adopted, but also some other items that turned out to be heartburn when it was originally adopted in 2014. And we also solicited some feedback from some other folks in the assessment realm and policy experts, including the two former executive directors of the board who went through this process in 2014, and see if we could get any lessons learned or if they had additional comments. So some of the changes here, what's being displayed right now is the engrossed version, but a couple of the changes, like I mentioned before, is updating it to conform to the board's 5-year assessment plan. There were some things in there mentioning end-of-course assessments. Of course, with the board's 5-year assessment plan, that would no longer be valid, so we had to take some of that stuff out and update it. Some other things were things around the 21st century technology. If you recall, a couple years ago, that was heartburn for folks in the field, and that ended up getting to the legislature as well in terms of heartburn about, frankly, the way it was worded in the assessment values was not in and of itself an issue, but the way that it was being interpreted turned out to create heartburn for folks. So we clarified that 21st century technology is still the goal, and it's still dependent on available infrastructure, but with the provision that LEAs have that option to use a written test if they would like, and that's in statute. The biggest change is probably some of this lead-in language, and this was the biggest topic of discussion at the board's retreat, talking about what the purpose of the statewide assessment is and what it fits into in the larger context of assessments. And that goes around locals have assessments, interim assessments, formative, diagnostic, universal screeners that serve various purposes for themselves, and the state has the statewide assessment, which is really serving a very unique purpose, which is essentially a systems measurement tool. And so part of this is messaging what this values document. It's very high level, and I think we mentioned this at the retreat. The board will still have plenty of opportunity with Audra's team to provide input on the specifics of the RFP and, of course, the specifics of the new assessment. However, when her team is going to draft the RFP right now so that the board could provide, very specific feedback, this is sort of the goalpost. This is sort of the just come up with a bunch of metaphors that mean the same thing, but this is going to help guide them in drafting that RFP.
Right.
So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions on the assessment values.
Board members, any questions? With that, do I have a motion to approve updates to Board Policy 002, assessment values as presented?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Member Baker. Any other questions, comments, or discussion? Hearing none, all in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, it's passed. We okay, folks? Okay, I'm getting the look. We need a break. Okay, all right. There is that subtle, non-spoken look that says, "I need a break." So with that, let's take a let's take a 10-minute break, and we'll get started at 11:35.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Especially the left side here needed the break. Class.
There you go. You got that teacher voice on right now.
Raise our hands. Our silence.
This is why we can't take breaks, folks.
I'm still not listening to you. Man, this is a rowdy class.
President Narducci would have control of this meeting, but I'm going to get us back on track as promised at the Arizona English Learner Framework. Director Williams?
Vice President, core members of the board, we have a presentation from Kate Wright, the Associate Superintendent of High Academic Standards for Students.
Good morning.
Welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Kaur, Superintendent Hoffman, members of the board. It's our pleasure to be here today, and it's my great joy to not be here alone this morning. Presenting to you, I have two of our West Ed colleagues that will also be presenting, and I'll share the stage with them here shortly. I'm going to give you just some context, and really the purpose of this morning's presentation is to provide you with an update on the work that we're doing prior to a presentation that we'll share with you in December, which will be an action item, to take a look at frameworks to evaluate English language instructional programs for the state of Arizona. So just to give you this background context, the purpose of the EL frameworks, or really the impetus behind the creation of this, was legislation that was passed on Valentine's Day this past year, SB 1014, and it changed the minimum required daily minutes of ELD from 4 hours to 120 minutes for K-5 and 100 minutes for 612. That's really the surface easy piece there, and that's what we're implementing during this school year. But it did provide additional new flexibility in English learner programs. It allows for those minutes to be spread across a week, across a month, looking at an annual designation of time. And in addition, it really puts an emphasis on the ownership of approving evidence-based models of instruction on the state board. That was in previous statute as well, but it really emphasizes the fact that alternate English language programs should be evaluated and should be approved by the board. So because of that, we are working on frameworks for evaluation of EL programs, which will allow the board then to look at alternate programs and determine whether or not they meet some key criteria. And so the steps we've been taking in partnership with West Ed and an EL Frameworks Committee is we've really started by looking at what is effective instructional practices, what do they look like for English learners, and to create a common understanding of evidence-based effective instructional practices in the state of Arizona. And so we've started, that's been the key work of our spring and summer work. And then from that work, and I'll give you a snapshot of that, or we will this morning, we have created what we call a language development approach, or an LDA. That's a national term for evidence-based practices and common principles that guide instruction. And we'll share, and I believe shared with you in your packet, our draft of our Arizona development approach. And then from that language development approach, then we are building frameworks for effective EL programs, and that is what we will share with you in December. This is actually, I believe, who, not why. This is who. I've done the why. The thought leaders behind this process are our EL Advisory Council, and that we've talked about in previous board meetings. That's a group of about 85 stakeholders I'll talk to on a slide upcoming. We then also have an EL Frameworks Committee, our staff with ADE, our OLA staff, and West Ed, who's joining me this morning as a partner, a thought partner, and implementation ally. And then the decision makers are the Superintendent of Public Instruction along with the State Board of Education. Oh, there we go. The purpose of the Statewide Advisory Council, just again for context and to remind you, we have a council. It's an open membership of stakeholders across the state. It brings together a diverse group of community and district stakeholders. We have Expect More Arizona, Read On Arizona, Helios as partners, as well as many of our districts are represented, and all of our state universities and higher education. And so the purpose is to provide insight and inform decisions. We have been sharing this work with them throughout the process. And so they have seen the language development approach, and they're familiar with this work as well, and they've been giving us feedback. So what we share with you today has already passed through them. The EL Frameworks Committee is a subcommittee of that group. It was a selected group of representing stakeholders from across the state. We have 16 external members, 2 active supporting members from West Ed, and then my staff in Oellis participate on the Framework Committee. This is just to give you a visual of those folks working with us. We have representation from Yuma, from Tucson, from Flagstaff, and from Phoenix, along with representation from our traditional LEAs and our charter districts. And so this was actually, this past meeting was last week, and they're hard at work coming up with some revisions to our LDA and taking it from the language development approach that you have in front of you to a framework that we can use to evaluate models. That's the hard task we have ahead. The Framework Committee reviewed 7 major research syntheses, and so at this point I'm going to pass the baton over to Dr. Molly Faulkner-Bond and allow her to share a little bit about herself and then this research that West Ed brought in to support the process.
Vice President Corr, Superintendent Hoffman, and members, thank you. So, as Kate mentioned, all the work that we've done to develop the LDA and sort of undergird the framework that we will eventually produce has been we've based it strongly in an evidence base. So I'm just going to introduce you a little bit to the particular research syntheses that we used to develop this work. Just in terms of background, my background is in assessment. I have a PhD in educational measurement. I've worked with several different states around their accountability systems and also their English learner policy and instruction. And so I was very excited to get to work with Kate and the committee to do this work. So, as Kate mentioned, there were 7 major research syntheses that we used to as the foundation for the LDA and the framework work. And I'm just going to walk you through those 7 to let you know kind of where they came from and why we chose them. So 2 of the biggest are recent reports, consensus study reports that came out of the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine, which is an independent, nonpartisan organization that was designed to advise the country on these topics. The major takeaway about both of these consensus study reports is their sheer scale. So these are enormous documents, book-length documents, many chapters, each of which has hundreds of research studies and reports through them. They are created by an authoring committee of experts, which range from 16 up to 20 for the 2 different reports. They include findings, conclusions, recommendations of information gathered by the committee and their deliberations. And they also go through an external review, which is also based on 10 or 12 reviewers who then review what the central committee has done. The goal here is really to try and be exhaustive, to really see what is out there, what kind of research has been done about English learner instruction. You can see one of these was specifically focused on STEM subjects. The other is about just the general educational success of children and youth learning English. So that one really goes from early childhood all the way up to post-secondary. Each chapter in each report has a different specific focus. So it might be on elementary education, it might be on early childhood education, it might be on STEM, might be on assessment. And each one, the committee reviews all of the research that they can find. They deliberate using their professional expertise. They send it out for peer review. And then they come up with sets of recommendations and conclusions based on what they saw in those reports. These were published in, I believe, 2016 and 2017. 2 other resources that we used are practice guides that were produced by the Institute of Education Sciences, which is actually where I worked before I came to West Ed. These are a bit more selective in the research that they use. So IES has very specific standards for research and for evidence and for the use of the term effective. So for these guys, they are limiting their recommendations to studies that have particular designs and that conduct particular kinds of comparisons about how certain interventions work relative to student outcomes. So you can see these are also authored by committees of experts who combine their expertise along with the available research findings to develop these specific recommendations. And for these guides, they actually rate the strength of the evidence based on the number of studies, the size of the studies, the design of the studies, and what the studies actually found. So one of these practice guides was published in 2007. It includes 5 recommendations, 4 of which were rated to have a strong evidence base and 1 that had a low evidence base. And then a 2014 guide that produced 4 recommendations, 2 had a strong research basis, 1 moderate, and 1 minimal. A 5th resource that we use is a literature review that was published by the Office of Policy Evaluation Planning. Can't remember what the D is right now, but that's also at the the U.S. Department of Education. For full disclosure, I was actually one of the lead authors on this report as a contractor to this office at the Department of Ed. This was closer to the NASEM reports, where really what we were trying to do is get a thorough review of all the research that was out there in the field. What kinds of questions are people asking? How are they answering those questions? What are they finding? What are gaps? What are debates? And really just try to synthesize that and say across this body of work, here's what we're seeing in terms of themes, in terms of consensus, in terms of agreement, disagreement, debate again. This one came up with 12 general emergent themes. It wasn't attempting to be prescriptive. It was really about being descriptive about what we see out there in the field. The 6th synthesis that we used was a book that was published by the California Department of Education, as well as a subsequent publication that really just was the research synthesis that undergirded that book. This was about, again, improving education for English learners. It was state-specific, but they really tried actually to look across the country and even at international studies as well to, again, see what are other people doing, what do we see in the research, what seem to be effective practices for these students. The research synthesis for this book was produced by 3 authors who reviewed 93 source articles, and they came up with 14 guidelines around English language development instruction. And then the final 7th resource that we looked at came from the Understanding Language Initiative, which is based at the Stanford Graduate School of Education and was created around the time that the Common Core state standards came out and was really designed to, as it says, improve education for all students in math, science, and English language arts. So this was really about content instruction for English learners, but trying to make sure that we are delivering rigorous content instruction to English learners with awareness of their needs as language learners and how to sort of work language and literacy through that. This was led by Kenji Hakuta, who is one of the foremost experts in the United States around English learner education, as well as Jen and Maya's colleague, Maria Santos, who is at West Ed, though I believe she was at Oakland Unified at the time. So this group also came up with 5 principles for ELL instruction that were research-based. And the idea was, again, to make sure we have a strong foundation for how to effectively educate these kids. So just a couple clarifying notes on these syntheses, which form the basis for the language development approach we developed, which my colleague Jennifer will talk about in just a moment. We decided to focus on syntheses rather than individual studies, mostly to get as large a scale as we could. So obviously, any one study can be biased, can be lucky, can be unlucky, can be context dependent. But when we start to look at these larger syntheses, we can really look at trends that are out there in the field. We can look at areas of consensus, areas of either disagreement or just lack of clarity where more research is needed. And by looking at those syntheses, rather than attempting to look at all those individual studies ourselves, we're trying to get sort of an emergent view of what the field is thinking. The terms effective and evidence-based have been discussed before and will kind of continue to be discussed. I'm just going to mention here that the term effective has different meanings to different people in the field of education. As someone who came from IES, they have a very specific definition for what effective means. It's a term that is generally reserved for only certain kinds of research studies with certain designs that are analyzed in a certain way. Not everyone uses that definition, but because it can mean different things to different people, we're trying to think about this more as evidence-based, and that this framework and the LDA is really built on our understanding of the evidence that's out there. We're not saying that we've found the answer, this is what it is, and the case is settled, but based on what we know and what the evidence is showing so far, here's what the practices are. Related to that, I think it's also important to always be aware that the evidence base is constantly evolving. So there's always a need for more research. Causal research that often is where people want to talk about things being effective is very slow and very expensive, and there's more happening all the time, particularly when it comes to English learners. There's just not a ton out there, though there's always more happening. So relevant to remember that but most of these resources were developed by panels of experts, and they have an important role to play there because we're still evolving the research base. So their expertise is critical in terms of looking at what we have so far and making judgments about what that might mean. So most of these recommendations are a combination of here's what the research definitively shows, and then based on things that are still ambiguous, here's what we recommend based on our expertise and understanding of various aspects of educating English learners. Some of these recommendations could evolve over time. I think it's unlikely that there would be any future finding where we find, we thought practice X was effective, it turns out it's harmful for kids. But it might be that we thought practice X was effective, but if you add this piece to it, it's even more effective. Or if you tweak this piece, then it's even more effective. So there's always room for these things to evolve, and that's actually true even if we have causal evidence from an RCT. There can still be future research where we find that actually if we change this one thing, it's even more effective. So these research syntheses really are our attempt to just get a comprehensive view of what the field is thinking now and what our research evidence and our experts' recommendations are telling us is effective for English learners. And I'm going to pass it over now to my colleague, Jennifer Blitz, who will talk about how we took all of this information from these syntheses and started to build the LDA.
Well, good morning, Vice President Kaur, Superintendent Hoffman, and members. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Jennifer Blitz. I am local. I have been a teacher and administrator in a few districts throughout the state, one of which was Vail, so it's a pleasure to see some of my former friends here today.
A little love for Vail. Nice.
I know. Four of us in the room today, at least. So it has really been a pleasure to work with Kate and Molly and to design some of the activities, particularly that the EL Framework Committee has undertaken. That small, remember 16 members from various districts throughout the state, and then the 8 OLS team reps, they have had the teeny tiny task of taking all of these thousands of pages of research that Molly just reviewed with you and distill it into the state's language development approach, or what we hope will be approved as the state's language development approach. So a few of the things that we've done is we've taken some of these principles that are in these various research syntheses, and we've attempted to find some connections. Luckily, within those 7 research syntheses, there is a lot of overlap. It's not like we're reading one of the NASM reports and then we read one of the IAS practice guides and they conflict with one another. So luckily, they're saying a lot of the same things. One of the things we did that we've got a picture of here is we took the principles from the different reports and we really had small groups attempt to cluster those principles into some of those areas where they overlapped. So you can see in this particular group, they noticed that there were several principles in the area of having our English learners engage with peers and interact, that there were a lot of principles around the idea of oral and literacy development. And we were seeing, as we saw different groups work, we were seeing that there was a lot of overlap in these principles and a lot of overlap in the work and the buckets, if you will, that different groups were grouping these principles into. Which brings us to this. We were able to see some of that overlap, and we were able to really put some of those categories together, again, trying to distill these pages and pages of research into some smaller areas. And then based on these different overlaps, these different buckets, which you can see in the top left, we had a lot of different categories around oral language development and literacy development. We had a lot of different areas, a lot of different principles come together around the idea of formative and summative assessment, a lot around small group instruction, a lot around language and content integration. So we were able to really dig into these syntheses and do a lot of reading, a lot of discussion. We viewed some videos of evidence-based practices so that we were really able to get to our language development approach. And this idea of a language development approach, just like Molly and Kate were saying, this is a national term which really refers to, like it says here, our best thinking really made explicit. What do we know is evidence-based, and how do we really distill that down and bring it down to these principles in our language development approach so it'll be accessible to practitioners at various LEAs around the state. So this is the graphic that is in the language development approach that you have in your packet in front of you. And really at the core of these 5 principles is the idea that all educators share that responsibility for the success of our English learners. It is not just our SEI teacher or not just our English learner specialist that is responsible for supporting our English learners to develop the English they need to reclassify and really be successful beyond their schooling, but that is the responsibility of every educator at a particular site: teachers, administrators, coaches, district personnel. And then we've got these 5 principles that are sort of hovering outside that hub. And I just want to review those briefly. And I'm going to go actually in a counterclockwise direction, starting with asset-based behaviors and expectations. The idea behind asset-based behaviors and expectations, and if a particular LEA is enacting this principle, that means they would value multiculturalism, multilingualism, and biliteracy. It really is based on an understanding that our English learners, and all students to be fair, but our English learners come to school with a wealth of assets. They have a knowledge base around how language works. They have the cultural knowledge. They have prior knowledge. That it's really our responsibility to not only acknowledge and respect that, but also leverage it and capitalize on that for our instruction. Going again counterclockwise to take a look at student agency. This is the idea that we really want to develop in our English learners a sense of ownership over their learning and a sense of self-efficacy. We want to provide them with content and tasks that's not only rigorous and at grade level, but really relevant. We want students to take part in their learning. We want them to be able to really assess where they are in their learning, know what their strengths are, what their challenges are, and be able to advocate for themselves. Continuing along in the principles in assessment, monitoring, and feedback, we want to, of course, use our summative, our big cycle, our long cycle assessment data more in our programming and our scheduling decisions for our English learners. But just as important is that really that minute by minute, day by day, week by week formative assessment data in really forming instructional decisions, how we're going to monitor how our instruction is affecting our English learners and adjust that instruction accordingly, and also provide appropriate feedback based on what we're seeing with our students. Which brings us to the last 2 principles, which are really these last 2 principles, this integrated instruction in disciplinary and language and content and targeted and explicit language instruction, is really what comprises a comprehensive instructional approach for English learners. So that targeted and explicit language instruction, that's what we traditionally think of when we think of instruction for our English learners, where our English learners are grouped likely by proficiency level, and they're receiving really that targeted instruction about how English works. We often think about that as vocabulary and grammar. We're really looking at supporting our students in speaking and listening and reading and writing. And the idea is that we're really targeting the language that our English learners are going to need through the rest of their school day, because the rest of our school day is what we call integrated instruction in disciplinary language and content. So particularly with the reduction in minutes where students will be receiving targeted instruction, this integrated instruction is particularly important because our English learners do need to be integrated throughout the rest of the day, but they won't be able to become proficient in English unless everybody throughout their school day is really focusing on language. So the idea with integrated instruction is that all of our teachers are focusing on our language learners' needs, even if it's not that targeted time in the day. So this might mean that a 3rd grade teacher during their math time is focusing on what mathematics language do my English learners need in order to be able to participate with this grade level content. At the secondary level, a government teacher might be thinking, okay, I've got English learners here in my government class. In addition to the government content, what language do my students need in order to be able to work with this content? So again, we've got these 5 principles, and these will serve really as a foundation for the framework moving forward that this committee is going to be working on. So the idea is that whether it is a state-approved model or whether a particular LEA is submitting an alternative model for approval, the idea is that they will demonstrate that that model is really enacting these 5 principles.
And just to clarify as well, the committee had, in addition to all of the resources that Molly reviewed, the committee also had an opportunity to look at some things other states have put together similarly. And this is uniquely Arizona. So there were pieces that they felt strongly like, oh, we like how New York did this. But what you see in that packet and on the screen is not a model of any other state. It's how Arizona has interpreted all of the national research and everything that exists. And our own internal experts have decided this is what matches and aligns with Arizona's needs. So the framework is our next step. That's what we will bring to you for approval and adoption in December, and certainly can share along the way additional information prior to December if requested or needed. But that is the tool that will be used to evaluate language instruction educational programs in addition to SEI. So that would be alternate programs or ways of looking at structured English immersion that don't fit the 120 and 100-minute daily models. Anything that's outside of that box, we would use the framework to determine whether or not they had the components that matched our language development approach. And those models, per what we agreed to with SB 1014, can be brought forth in the spring of 2020 for implementation in school year 2021, which is why we'll bring them forth in December for discussion and hopeful action. This slide dates back a little bit, but our next steps internally with this group, we met last week on September the 19th to start that framework. We're sharing an update with you today. We meet just 2 more times, which is a little daunting for us, with this group in October and November to firm up what the framework will look like, and then we'll bring that back to you at our December meeting, which is early December. And at this point, if we can answer any questions, we will be happy to do so.
And Member Baker.
Yes, thank you, Vice President Kaur and members. This is obviously a topic that evokes a lot of passion and a lot of different opinions. So as you're working through this, what are some of the more common concerns that you hear expressed from LEAs regarding this issue?
Dr. Kaur, Superintendent, Member Baker, when we share this, I think some of the major concerns are really around professional development. So we hear a lot. I just presented at Guppy Mac and I presented at ASBA and at ASA next week. What we hear from all levels of stakeholders is how do we get prepared to do any of these things? So, like, we agree with the principles. Most people say, we agree. That sounds good. We think all those things are important. How do we share that information across systems? How do we prepare our administrators at a district, at a school level, at a site, or that's a site, at a district and site level to implement these things? That tends to be the biggest concern. It's not so much from a philosophical approach. It's more from a practical, logistical implementation. And I think we heard that even with SB 1014, just even with a reduction of time. Stakeholders who we know had been previously wanting flexibility, when they got it, they didn't know what to do for sure. So, we anticipate that this is the first step in an enormous project for our state at really evaluating and making some big long-term decisions around how we want to educate our English learners. Obviously in alignment with statutory requirements, but also moving some of our philosophical beliefs into practice. And that is a heavy lift. So this is the start of that work. But the concerns most often are how do we make this happen? Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Member Mack?
Dr. Kaur, Superintendent Hoffman, and members, I guess I'm wondering, along with those concerns, have there been considerations across systems, like you were mentioning, not just the EL teachers, but the culture shift within the system and across disciplines? Mm-hmm. How is that implementation going to happen? Because it sounds like we are all responsible. I'm just curious to
Dr. Core, Superintendent Member Mack, that's a great question. That, I think, goes along with my response to Member Baker. The idea that our content area teachers will need significant support to meet the needs of our English learners. And I don't think that that's a change necessarily. Many of our content teachers have had English learners in their classrooms, but I think previously they felt like the language that they needed was being provided in another setting, whether it was an SEI classroom or a pull-out session. So now the idea that if we really want to move the needle for English learners, we need a comprehensive approach will require those two pieces you spoke to: a culture shift, an ownership, a belief, sort of that buy-in, and in addition, the professional learning that's required to make to allow for teachers to provide that kind of differentiated instruction. Mm-hmm.
Oh, Member Rui, sorry.
Yeah, Vice President Core, Superintendent Hoffman, members, there's 3 points that I want to touch on, and I don't know what your studies have shown, but experience is that 2 factors that really affect English learning is poverty. The poorer the child is, the more difficult it is to teach English. And you can have all the, the tutoring and the intense stuff, but that child goes home as soon as school's over, and older brother, sister is taking care of him in the evening. Mom's working at night, dad's working during the day, and it's one of the things that, one of the realities that we have to address. And I don't know what, in your studies, the impact of poverty on English acquisition. Second would be at the age in which the student arrives. You get the little ones, pre-K through 3, God bless them, they're going to learn English, by 6th grade, they'll be fluent in both languages. You get that kid who shows up, he's a sophomore. I know one young man right now from Honduras. I think he's a sophomore or junior. He does not know any English. And I'm going, you're not going to teach this kid the same you're going to teach those little ones. So whether your framework takes into account those 2. And then the third point I'd make is communities like ours, we have to come to realities that we have to have a good SEI program. We have to have a good ELL program. You can tell I'm old school, I'm going ELL, We go ELL and then we go EL. But we've come to the realization we have to have a good program if we're going to be successful. My concerns are those schools that have those schools that have just a small portion, maybe 10, 15% of their population has EL students, and you go like, well, it's not a whole lot. So, we'll just deal with it a little bit. And in your framework, do you have an answer for these 3 realities? 1, schools like ours, you have to deal with it because this is an issue. Second, for those schools who have maybe 10, 15% EL students, and you got to dabble in it, but how deep do you want to go into it? And then the third is you don't have any EL students. It's not an issue. And how do you get everybody to buy into this policy change that you want to do for Arizona?
Dr. Core, Superintendent, Member Ruiz, those are great questions. I certainly will defer to my research experts if they want to add. So I'm going to talk to you as a practitioner. I certainly think that the idea of poverty plays a role in how we educate many of our students, and certainly for sure plays a role in language acquisition. The fact that this is a comprehensive model for instruction takes into account those needs that students bring with them to the classroom. And in addition, the fact that it really focuses on asset-based, right? So looking at meeting students where they are, celebrating what they bring with them, and then supporting what they need to be successful through the rest of that circle. As far as varying programs across populations, so high density populations, low density, one of the really important parts of this framework is saying these things must be in place no matter what, right? These are our non-negotiable components of instruction. There must be targeted support for English learners. Whether you have 5 or whether you have 55, you must be providing language development to them. And I think we have conversations now around whether or not we're meeting those needs with ILPs. Whether the ILP would pass muster against the framework. I don't think so. So I think that we've got some things to talk about as far as how we look at low incident populations and what that looks like as far as meeting the requirements of those needs. But the fact of the matter is we look at these guiding principles as the non-negotiables for English learners in whatever setting they may be in. So addressing it from that perspective.
And then the age categories?
Oh, yeah. I think that you speak to something that research absolutely supports, right? So both the age in which a student enters formal program and the language proficiency that they bring with them at that time of entry have a tremendous impact on their trajectory. So I think one of the things we've talked a lot about is that flexibility, right? Before it was every single English learner receives 4 hours of instruction until they're proficient. Now we're looking at what does that look like across a transitional model, both in age and proficiency level. And that's where there's some local control decisions, but there's tremendous guidance from experts and from the state around what kinds of services can and should be provided to students as they enter with different needs at different grade levels. And so we have even now Glendale Union High School District, and I'll use it as an example because they're on our framework committee. They receive a lot of refugee students that you're speaking about at grade 10, and they have a very specific program for those students that's different from the same kind of language services that they provide to a student who's been within the system for a longer period of time. And that's what we would hope, right? And I think one of the things that comes that I think is I know, is a major shift that we're facing is this issue between compliance and effectiveness. When I've spoken to other stakeholder groups and we talk about a comprehensive system that involves content area teachers, they say, is that required? How is it documented? What does that look like? What will happen when you come and monitor? And all of those things shifting from is it required? Is it best practice? Is it what leads to effectiveness? Is this how we drive change? Those are major shifts in conversation we have to have across systems.
Dr. Molly, anything to add?
I was just going to add that, so across the country, English learners are more likely than the general population to come from under-resourced backgrounds. So all of the research studies that are in those syntheses, it's more likely than not that their populations reflect Arizona's population. It's not that these are studies of, wealthy English learners who come from well-resourced neighborhoods and we're trying to generalize them to a different population. That's sort of baked into all the research. So you're right that it does create some challenges, but I would just echo also what Kate says, that part of addressing that need is maybe shifting the way we think about it to acknowledge that it's not that time at home with their sibling isn't valuable, or that if they're not using English that they can't be learning and still developing their knowledge. So how can we leverage that and make sure that the programs at school are acknowledging that and are designed in such a way that those kids can thrive? Because unless we believe that poverty means they're incapable, they certainly can meet high standards.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yeah, Member Wellborn.
Dr. Kaur, Superintendent. I'm really impressed, and again, I'm not an educator, but I was really impressed to the degree how comprehensive your approach has been, and the courage you're taking to try and come up with an Arizona-specific model that represents the latest in thinking and what's effective. As I hear you're talking about getting into parts of the framework that need to address differentiation and target specific, I leap to our challenge in literacy, because we have a lot of students in Arizona who may not be designated EL that have very underdeveloped language skills. So I ask the question, how can we take advantage of the work you're doing to inform our literacy program in general, and to inform teaching and instructional staff about this concept that everyone needs to participate in all staff, not just the EL staff, because we do have so many kids that are underdeveloped in their language skills. I just throw it out there that as you work, if there's a way to collaborate with the other folks that are working on very similar issues here in the reading program, and if that can be disseminated to the schools to the benefit of here's the latest thinking. I'm assuming that it's applicable knowledge, that I'm assuming these lessons are applicable. And my request is that we get out of our silos a little bit and recognize the importance of what you're doing to the benefit of just literacy as a whole.
Dr. Kaur, Superintendent, Member Wellborn, you've sort of helped us talk about future steps through your question. OELLIS is blessed to be working closely with K-12 Standards in Early Childhood as part of the same unit and division, along with Assessment, who's been a close partner with us in this work. So we will absolutely use the findings that we have from this group to further conversations across our agency on how we approach instruction and look at research-based and evidence-based models.
And also the ad hoc committee on literacy, if you would share.
Yes, I will. Thank you.
Superintendent Hoffman.
Thank you, Vice President Kaur, and I really appreciate your comments, Member Wellborn. I was having similar thoughts too with just how this translates into special education, that it's a school-wide approach. Every educator is responsible for educating every child. So just wanted to say thank you for tying it to literacy, and then also wanted to make the connection to special education too, especially since we do have a lot of bilingual, multilingual special ed students. So it's all connected. So thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
1 second.
Yes.
I just wanted to just to piggyback because I love, sorry, Vice President Kaur, Superintendent Hoffman, Member Wellborn.
We practiced a little bit.
Doesn't come easy, does it?
I'll get the hang of it.
Yeah,
Just something to amplify on what you said that I think comes from the research base and might be relevant is that for a long time I think the attitude was what's good for all kids is also good for English learners. And I think what the research is starting to show that it's actually the opposite of that what's good for English learners is good for all kids. So it's not that you should just keep doing kind of best practice for the general population and trust that it will trickle down to English learners, but if you do what's good for English learners, chances are it will benefit all students. So that kind of shift, which I think is pretty well supported in the research base, might be a key leverage point as you continue to roll this out.
Thanks, Molly.
Fantastic. My thanks to all three of you.
Thank you. Thank you for your time this morning.
Going to move us on to item 5E. Once again, an information item. This is the presentation and discussion on accountability work, including component scoring, district letter grades, and the 2019-20 accountability system. Director Williams.
Vice President Kaur, Superintendent Hoffman, members of the board, Wendy Davey, Chief Accountability Officer with the Department of Education, will present the component scoring, the district scoring, and future A-through-F accountability. I just want to relate to the board members that we've seen in the study session that occurred on July 16th, I believe it was, the component and district modeling, at which point the board directed board staff to send out a survey. We did do that. If there are questions in regard to the survey documents that you have received, please let us know, and I will have Jessica address those survey questions. But for the most part of today's agenda, we're just going to do a brief overview, kind of put our feet in the sand per se, and then we'll continue to provide updates to the board until we ultimately vote.
Vice President Kaur, Superintendent Hoffman, thank you for allowing accountability and via the technical committees come before you again. As you can see, I've added a name here. I just quickly wanted to introduce Dr. Carrie Giovanone Jordan. She is our new Director of Accountability. She can stand up. I'm not going to make her come up, but eventually you won't have to just listen to me. She can take some of the lead on this as well. So the future of A-through-F accountability, what this is a chance for us to tell you where we are, what we're looking at, what we have to do, and if needed, give us some bumper cars and some direction of where you would like us to go. We currently have 3 active models. We have K-8 traditional, 9-12 traditional, and 9-12 alternative. We've already brought forth to you K-8 component scoring, district letter grades. What we are working on, or what we're going to be working on that is still in the queue, is Arizona Online Instruction, AOIs, JTEDs/CTEDs, and extremely small schools. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to give you a little bit of where we are. And right now, I'm going to just sort of tell you some of the challenges, some of the things we're looking at with the 3 models that we currently have. So looking at K-8, really the one challenge we're looking at before we get a new assessment in 2 years is the removal of the end-of-course assessments. So as you know, you could earn 5 points in the acceleration readiness for accelerating your students. The technical advisory group has received letters, we have received emails, and we're taking a good hard look at this in absence of not having EOCs. We have spent already, even though we're doing current A through F, we also have modeling going on the side, so the team actually is current and future. So we took a deep dive into our student course data. The conclusion there is it's not up to par yet, but it could be for future. We have been bringing forth some great ideas, and we're modeling it. So we are not giving up on those 5 points. And what we want to do is whatever we look at, we want to make sure it's encouraging the high performance, the acceleration, and the students achieving math in 8th grade, setting them up for success. As we know, that's one of the benchmarks, is success in math grade, whatever course you are, makes you ready for high school. That is the big hump, or the big idea, or the thing we have to work on K-8. 9-12, no surprise, is growth is back, and we are looking at this as well. So currently we're looking at it 2 standpoints. As I said earlier, the subgroup data is coming back with nice differentiation. We have to dig deeper to see what that impact was on small schools, poverty, and school size. In addition, we currently have hot off the press, we are doing modeling using SGP, and we just finished modeling 8th grade to 10th grade. So the current 10th graders who took EOC last year, because that test should basically be the same, if you use just their 8th grade score, we're going to pull those scores and we're going to compare how that looks with the EOCs on schools that we know are consistent. What we do know is there's a chance whether subgroup turns out to be good or growth comes back in, that we definitely have some alternatives for our high schools moving forward in 20 and 21. On our 9-12 alternative, this is the first year. 2 things we really need to look at, and that's probably the business rules regarding FAE. So as you know, we're deep into it, we're following the rules closely, and we may have to look at AOIs that are also alternatives. Alternative status trumps AOI status, so you have to follow the rules. And the way we're currently looking, we may not be pulling in all the assessments we want to, so we definitely want to revisit that next year. And then we also want to look at the CCRI. So they turned in good data, just like I told you we have extended data for the regular traditionals. We also, first time out, gathered all that data first for the alt, so we'll be able to give you that data as well. Is the earning 1 point too low? Do we want to go to 1.5 or possibly 2? So the technical advisory groups are all busy with K-8, 9-12, and alt 9-12. So our goal when we're bringing this stuff forward is, can we bring you a model that would last until the new assessment in 22? So the technical group, like I said, I'm honored to represent them, but they're working really hard along with the modeling. So questions on where we are, and just keep going? Sir.
Member Baker.
Vice President, core members, I just want to say I really strongly support the monitoring and adjusting, right, and the examination of the systems. And I agree with the letter that was referenced earlier. We need to incentivize schools to push kids ahead in areas like math. And I have referenced this issue in an email. I just want to bring it up publicly, and that's the issue of the bonus points for special ed. As we were designing this system, just to jog everybody's memory, we face a reality that in both traditional public schools and in the charter school world, there's very significant differences in the percentage of special ed students who are being served. And obviously, the number of special ed students being served has a significant impact on average scores and score attainment. So we set up the belief that was pretty widely, or the standard everybody pretty much agreed to, is that there should be some bonus points for schools that are accepting the responsibility of taking the full load of special education students. Within the traditional education model, there's schools that require testing for students to get into the school, and so obviously they don't have the same number of special ed students. And within the charter school world, there are different types of charter schools that attract different kinds of students, and some schools do not attract special ed students, so they are freed, as with the testing schools and the traditional one, they're freed from that responsibility, or from much of it. So we didn't do modeling. We just kind of thought 80% is a good number. Certainly, if somebody has 80% of the state average, if the state average is 10%, if a school is dealing with 80%, I mean, if the state average is 10% special ed, if a school has at least 8%, they're accepting a responsible number. But what we're finding out, and at least anecdotally, and I'm sure you can confirm it with data, is that there are some schools in the state that serve isolated areas where there is no testing in the system, in the traditional system, and there are no other options available. They can't choose to go in another school district, and some of those schools are not meeting the 80% standard. So, as we monitor and adjust what we're doing, that number probably should be lowered. The other practical thing that has evidenced itself is that there's, and I think Member Reese has brought this up before, there's actually quite a bit of variation in percentage of students being served, special ed students being served. And maybe instead of an abrupt cliff where you either get 2 points or none, maybe there should be a graduated. Maybe it should be 1, 1.5, and 2. Because it's not just the 2 points that are at stake. The other thing that's at stake is that if you're going to get points for having a highly inclusive model, which is something we certainly want to incentivize, in order to be able to qualify for those points, you've got to meet the 80% rule. So both of those, both the 80% rule and the inclusion, both of those are, I just super strongly support those, but I just encourage the ATAC to relook at some of that and come back to us with a recommendation that reflects some of the data we've been able to collect, not to change the intent, but to make the system a little bit more fair and responsive to reality.
Vice President Core Member Baker, we actually have that study underway, and I'll have it for you in October.
Okay, thank you.
Fantastic. Other thoughts or questions? Member Ruiz.
Dr. Core, Superintendent Hoffman, and members. I had this question before, and I'm not sure I ever got an answer on, is why, we're talking about special ed kids, so why do special ed kids have to take the exam? Easy merit.
Vice President Core Member Ruiz, Wendy probably wouldn't be the correct person to ask that question or answer that question, right. and unfortunately neither I would be, but we will give you the information after the board meeting today.
Okay.
I do believe it's a federal and state that all students have to test, but we'll get you the statute.
That, but I think more it's like, I think the idea of incentivizing, and if anything, boy, that's a great disincentive. Since we're talking about how this overall, scoring, that's probably a reason why you're not supposed to. But I'm sure there are some schools that are kind of going like, Do you want the 2 points, or, we'll not get the 2 points, but don't admit those kids?
Okay.
Dr. Core, Superintendent Hoffman, and members, I wasn't going to comment on that, but I will. I think that is why it is important to continue to look at the model and look at, did it work as intended? Were there unintended consequences? Because you would also possibly even look at, what if a school is well above the state average?
Mm-hmm.
What is that suggesting?
Right.
So looking forward to that information. Additionally, when you mention the subgroup data that we have for 912, will we be able to see, I'm curious about earlier when you mentioned full access to the 20 points and falling short. I'm wondering about how short we're falling with the subgroup data. So if we will, can we see that?
Vice President Core, Member K, I can supply that to the state board. If you just think about a nice distribution and up to 100%, so both of them are nicely distributed, but the high point for the one is higher.
Yeah.
So they're getting more access based on the 100. The subgroup is nice. It's just not reaching what growth reached to.
Sure.
But we could definitely monitor it and move things around.
And then the other question I had was around the modeling of the SGP for the end of course. My understanding when we voted on the subgroup growth measure was that it was a one-year fix. And I know we're saying that there's a distribution, that there's a nice distribution. I just really want to emphasize if we can get back to what I would say is more of a true growth measure, whether from 8th to 10th grade over time, that's really where my preference is, because I think that's a better measure. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Okay, so I'm going to move again. These are two things that we brought back forward in that special board meeting. So this just is a high level to let you know and do it more in a broader setting. So this is the A through F K-8 traditional modeling. And like they said, this did go out for public comment. And if there's any questions, like Alicia said, we can address those. So it is in legislation in 15241G and H. G that we need to do it, and H that we have to have it by component. So we did do component scoring so that in the current model, we did it in a way that would not drastically change the scores, would give the differentiation that you would like to see in the various components. So we just took the cut score aligned, we did sort of a hardcore standard deviation kind of model, and then we looked at it, and then what we didn't want to do is have somebody get 3 Bs and have an overall grade of A's. So we made sure that they would go up and they wouldn't be different than what they were before too. So we used benchmarking is usually what they call that, where you're looking at set benchmarks. And basically we're looking at the possibility of holding on component scoring until 2022. That does not mean you can't change the components. That means you change the component that you're working on or that you have concerns about. So the overall approach was to look at a GPA model. So each component is going to get a letter grade. That would be proficiency, growth, acceleration, readiness, and EL. That would then be weighted based on the model's weight up until a final GPA score. And then what we talked about is you would then appeal your component and not the overall grade to change your overall grade. The way we currently have it modeled with the cut scores I'm going to show you is keeping the scores really close to where they are for the first set and then locking those scores. We don't want to change them unless there really is something specific that changes. So if the model were to work out and in 22 when we have a new test, if we were to see something drastic, then we'd want to go back and review that component for its own A through F scores. So as you can see here, we have modeled what would have been the points under the old system, what would have resulted in A, a B, a C, or a D. And then it's a simple weighting process. So anybody could go in and look at their points for 17, 18, or 19 and see what their component score would have been. This is a K-12 in report cards. As you know, our report cards gets lots of traffic. We've already talked about this. And when we built this part of report cards, we built it so that it could be somewhat of a dashboard where there will be another column where you have your state letter grades, you will be able to see each of the individual components and the overall, giving the parents a little bit more deeper insight. So if you really are a good growth district, and the modeling we did say you didn't have to be an A or B in both growth and proficiency, one or the other usually resulted in a possibility you could be an A overall. And I thank Dr. Carrie Jordan for looking at that again a little bit closer. So what we're looking at is the survey results here, so I'll give you guys a chance to look over that. I won't read it to you. And if you quickly add the support neutral, overall, it does appear, that most people knew this was coming. So I think a lot of people spent time with it and gave us some really good feedback. And I would stand for any additional questions. I know when we bring forth the model for K-8 with acceleration with a math portion answered, that we can answer the question on this as well. If you have any questions, I'll move on to district letter grades.
Member Welborn.
Thank you, Dr. Kaur, Superintendent Hoffman. Wendy, thank you so much. This topic really is testing my math skills. And I haven't been in the classroom in a long time. But am I correct in saying that when you have one system over here that adds up a bunch of points that leads to a score out of 100, that we have used a modified distribution model to decide what's an A, B, C. And then you have another system over here that takes pieces of this model and puts a 4.0 system to it, which is not a modified distribution curve. It's not even the pure differentiation curve. It's not even a 90-70, a 90-80-70 thing. It's a different ranking. That these two methodologies are not mathematically consistent, such that it's possible that you can have a bunch of letters over here that don't equate to the overall school grade.
If I can back up, Member Welborn, I think it's easier to bring this score right here. So originally we did standard deviation. So we've only had 2 years with standard deviation. As you saw earlier today, there's little wiggle room. I mean, it's staying pretty consistent. So when we looked at the component scoring, knowing that nothing really changed, you don't want to drastically put in a new component scoring. So we did standard deviation on those where most of the points, 80% of the points were coming from, which is proficiency and growth. So we did use that standard deviation. Then we actually looked to see how close was that coming to what it would have been, so there wouldn't be a change. There was only slight changes to put it more on benchmark. So they talk about benchmark criteria and reference. So yes, it is two methodologies put together, but it was with the goal to not overly change people's scores. So the standard deviation was applied to proficiency and growth, and that was 80% of the K-12 model. And like I said, then you applied it, looked at what the GPA was. I could give you more details on the slight modifications, but it only been like a hundredth or a point here or there, just so there wasn't like, we wouldn't go from 290 A's down to 200, or vice versa. We didn't go from 290 A's up to 350.
So I'm only understanding part of it because your math is much better than mine. But I think you're saying that you don't think it's possible for a school to have some math wizard do all the math using the 4.0 system on their component scoring that would lead them to a different overall school letter grade.
I'm not sure I understand your question as far as what you're having them do.
I don't know enough math to explain this. Is it?
I'd be remiss if I didn't say your local community college could provide excellent mathematics instruction.
In that case, I want to defer to to our local community college.
Vice President Core, Member Welborn, if you would like, I can put together how it was calculated, a little bit more of a technical look at how it was done.
Then you'll really lose me. No, I guess I'm just concerned that if we use a different mathematical method for these, that they're not compatible, and that you would have somebody with really great math skills look at the component scoring and do the math there and say we should have gotten a different letter grade for the school. Is that possible?
We hope they can. Actually, you should be able to take your component
No,
scoring
come
and
up with
apply
a
it.
different letter grade.
Like a higher letter grade.
A higher level, because we have a different distribution. It's not possible. So, then it doesn't matter.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm very confident in that answer. They may want a different letter grade, but the 4.0 is a solid, it will work. They won't be able to come up with a different letter grade knowing what their components are.
Okay.
Very good. Very good. Member
So
Baker?
Let me ask a question in a different way. So first, there is no choice on component scoring. It must be done, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And secondly, what you were trying to achieve is component scoring that will not, or that will be consistent with the final grade, so that what Member Wellborn is expressing concern about will not occur.
Correct.
As usual, Cal says it much better than I do.
Okay, I promise this is the last one, and then I'll go work on A through F. I promise.
Very good. Very good.
Okay, so district letter grades. If you remember back at our special board meeting, we brought together several models, and it came down that you requested that the two models, whether it be a straight GPA or a weighted GPA, be brought forward and then feedback gathered. So just at a high level, district letter grades are also required by 15241A. I am getting so good at these, I get excited sometimes. Okay, so this is district letter grades, and we talked about what they apply to, what impact they have, and a lot of people have been waiting for them to come back. So what a straight GPA looks at, that is where we just took, if you're a district that has 42 schools with 40 letter grades, you give them the weight of a 4, 3, 2, 1, you average them, no weighting, and then you have your cut scores, and you either get an A, B, C, D, or an F as a district. So that is just the straight GPA, and I'll show you what that would look like on the report cards, because that also helps give another vision of it. The district GPA model, why it was originally supported is it's simple for schools. Any school can do a GPA, especially a non-weighted GPA. Even sixth graders, fifth graders can do their own GPA. It's easy to calculate, it's reproduce. It withstands changes. So if we're changing the K-8, the 9-12, or the alternative, the district doesn't get touched. It can stay consistent no matter what we're doing to the models. It holds the districts accountable for all their schools equally. If you choose to have a 2,000-person comprehensive high school and you also build a specialty school, they're both important and you're holding them both accountable. And the districts may appeal their letter grade by appealing the school's individual letter grade. And like we said, schools are busy. Instead of focusing on that district letter grade with this kind of calculation that could take people a week to understand, you are diving back to your schools, you're looking at your school's data, and you're making the improvements and looking for your data at the school level where it matters. So we talked about the straight model versus the weighted. The weighted, when we calculated, was based on how many kids are in the static file. It's proportional to what you'd have in your October 1, not your ADM, because that goes another place. I shouldn't even mention that word here. But it'd be based on how many kids are in your schools. So when we looked at weighted, so if you have that comprehensive high school with 2,000 and a specialty school at 300, you can see that your comprehensive high school would carry much more weight. What we found out when we modeled the 523 districts, that 26 schools would end up with a district letter grade between the weighted and non-weighted. The weighted GPA resulted in 6 schools having a higher letter grade, and the weighted GPA resulted in 20 schools going down in a letter grade.
Schools or districts?
Districts, I'm sorry. Thank you for the clarification. I did say school, I should say district.
That's what it says up there.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And what it would look like on a report card, so here I pulled up Madison and I put in their letter grades. So if you looked at report cards, there's a little thing that clicks open on the district page and you can see all your schools. And right there is where it would be displayed for the public which school. Again, we built this with a plan that we would eventually have some dashboard component scoring going, and that's where it would show. And questions?
Member Kay?
Vice President Corr, Superintendent Hoffman, members. of those 26 schools, particularly the 20, what do we know about them? So you had referenced the small specialty schools, and it came up earlier in terms of schools that can be tested into. I think a concern that I have when I look at the straight GPA versus the weighted GPA is somehow if you have a handful of smaller schools that have admissions requirements and thresholds that are skewing under the straight GPA, that would be skewing the overall letter grade because maybe the majority of your students aren't doing quite as well, but a handful in specialty schools are performing really well. So what do we know about the 20 districts?
Vice President Kaur, Member K, I apologize. My analyst that does that is neck deep in A through F, but I will get those numbers to you and what the information is on those 26, and we can include that when it goes out for review, what those 26, what that impact looks like.
Yeah. And I think including in that is alternative schools. So there's some districts that carry a heavier burden, if you will, of alternative schools than others.
Vice President Kaur, Member Wellborn, we will be, because it was modeled on previous, we will have to wait until we know letter scores for our alt schools, but we'll try to model that once we have our alt grades in.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry, Member Baker.
Yeah, just a quick comment. This rule, it's easy to argue this one both ways, on weighted or non-weighted. I think the advantage to non-weighted is that for those alternative schools, for example, that you reference, for a school district, it puts just as much pressure on them to make sure the alternative kids are being taken care of as the kids at the regular schools. And the second thing is, it's one of our goals in this whole process to make everything as simple and as understandable as possible. And for parents, it's an easy thing. Oh, here's all the grades from the district. Bam. You average them out. That's what the district score is.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Good.
Thank you so much. Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely. I'm going to move us on to item 5F. This is presentation, discussion, and possible action to open rulemaking procedures for proposed amendments to Board Rule AAC R72604 regarding educator preparation program definitions. Director Williams.
Dr. Kaur, members of the board, the recommendation is to open rulemaking, so if board members have any questions, I can answer those for you. Otherwise, I would suggest move the motion.
Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Member Kay.
I'll second.
Member Broussard. Any questions, discussion? Hearing none, all in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Excellent. That passed. We'll move us on to G, and we'll kind of handle this in the same way. This is presentation, discussion, and possible action to open rulemaking procedures on AAC Title VII, Article 13, Conduct. Any questions for Director Williams? Director Williams? Go ahead.
Dr. Kaur, members of the board, item G comes from the board's retreat in a summary suspension. The board does have authority in Title 41 for summary suspensions. We thought it would be good to open rulemaking around summary suspensions. The information in the draft rule that is currently in your book is the draft rule that will go out for the public rule hearing. We are working with our board's legal team to ensure that we have the verbiage correct. I would suspect that this board will see a different version of the rule at the October board meeting for an update. We want to ensure that we include some language about around being arrested and charged with an offense.
Any questions or comments? Hearing none, I entertain a motion.
So moved.
Member Wellborn. Do I have a second?
Second.
Member Burton. Any other questions, comments? Hearing none, all in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, passes. Fantastic. Moving on to 5H, update on rulemaking procedures on AAC Title VII Articles 10 and 11, school district procurement. So this is for information only, correct?
Correct.
Dr. Williams?
So Dr. Core, if any members have any questions, we will be happy to answer that for you. If not, we can move on to the next update.
Any questions, members? Nope. Then I, in fact, will move on also to 5I, also information only, update on rulemaking procedures for English language learner programs. Any comments, Director Williams? No?
Same comment as previous.
Same comment as previous. Any questions? All right, fantastic. Then, hearing none, I'll move on to 5J. Also information only. Also, I assume the same comment from Director. See, you always throw
And
me
an
a
extra
curve. Now you
comment.
have a comment. So let me read this. This is 5J, update on rulemaking procedures regarding State Seal of Arts Proficiency Program. Director Williams.
Dr. Core, Superintendent Hoffman, and members, I just wanted to give a shout out. We did have at our public hearing 5 students from the Arizona School for the Arts give public comments at the public hearing in support of this seal. Always want to give a shout out to students participating, and they did a great job. So,
Oh, you bet.
I just wanted to let the board know about that.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? 5J. I will move on to 6. Hearing none, I will move on to 6. And I believe we are now convening and acting as the Arizona State Board of Vocational and Technological Education for items 6A and B. Is that correct?
Dr. Core, members of board, that is correct. Item 6A. I'm sorry, I'm jumping ahead of you. Call 6A.
No, please go ahead. Yeah,
Perfect,
please.
6A.
So
I do believe.
Moving on to 6A, which is presentation, discussion, and possible action to open for public comment the Perkins 5 state plan narrative. Dr.
Thank
Williams.
you, Dr. Core. And I do believe we do not have a technical presentation, but if the board members have any questions, department staff is available. If you do not have any questions about the narrative and opening it for public comment, then I would suggest moving to a motion.
Any questions or concerns or comments regarding the public comment for Perkins state plan narrative? Yeah, Member Baker.
Yeah, thank you, Vice President, core members. Just a quick question: there's just a whole lot of stuff in there? Is there just an executive summary of where we're going?
Vice President Core, Superintendent Hoffman, Member Baker, we attended a workshop with Advanced CTE last week and were able to get feedback from other states and see what they were doing, and that's exactly what we came up with, kind of a Reader's Digest abridged version that we think will work to post. And we've thought about having them side by side in case someone wanted really more detail. So we're in the process of developing that document right now to have the abridged and then the details.
Thank you.
Dr. Core, and to Member Baker's point, I think if you send that to me, I can send it out to the board members as well.
Okay.
Thank you. Member Mack.
Dr. Core, Superintendent Hoffman and members. I just was curious regarding point B under the program. So it's small b under B, program administration and implementation. So I'm really curious to see how the special populations was included in that section, because I don't really see too much mention of it. And then the emerging in-demand industry sector. So I'm really looking at the program listings, and I'm wondering what we're doing as a state to address things like machine learning, artificial intelligence, computer-based manufacturing, to meet all of these emerging needs that are going to be coming. And I don't know if that even is the definition of emerging within CTE, but I'm just thinking ahead of like how our whole industry is changing, even trucking to, manufacturing. And I'm just wondering how that all fits into that? if
We
it
get
does at
labor
all,
market
you know?
data now every year, and so we're looking at that. We just received it. We've decided to align our methodology with what the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act does, so that we're aligned with throughout the state on the same in-demand industries. The ones that are emerging on the list, the bioscience and the engineering, were labeled emerging several years ago because they typically require a 4-year degree. And our other programs have entry-level places that they can go. But we are looking, because of the governor's initiative on the industry incentive, we are looking at labor market data every year, and we revise our list every other year.
Cybersecurity is another one I think about.
Yeah, that's been blended in with network and security.
Okay. And then the special populations?
Okay, I'll have to.
It says describe the state's strategic vision and set of goals for preparing an educated and skilled workforce, including special populations. And I didn't see any explicit mention in this section to special populations, but maybe it's
later on.
somewhere else.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? So hearing none, do I have a motion to approve opening the Perkins 5 State Plan narrative for public comment for at least 30 days beginning September 30th, 2019?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you so much. Any other questions, comments? All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, it passes then. Moving on to 6B, presentation, discussion, and possible action to open for public comment the Perkins 5 state determined levels of performance. Director Williams, anything to add?
No, Dr. Corr.
Okay. Any questions or comments on this item? And hearing none, do I have a motion to approve opening the Perkins 5 State Plan state determined levels of performance for public comment for at least 60 days beginning September 30th, 2019?
So moved.
Second.
I have a first and a second. Thank you so much. Any other comments, questions? Okay, all in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
And any opposed? Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So do I need to do anything special to move us back to the Arizona State Board of Ed no, just move on to item 7, call to the public. This is a time for the public to comment on items for certification enforcement actions, consented items. Members of the board may not discuss items that are not specifically identified on the agenda. Therefore, action taken as a result of public comment will be limited to directing staff to study the matter, respond to any criticism, or schedule the matter for a further consideration and decision at a later time. Do we have anyone who wishes to address us?
Dr. Corr, we do not have any requests to speak for item 7. We do have 2 for item 9.
And I went through that long soliloquy and no one wanted to address
Yes.
us on item 7. That's once again very disappointing. So we will move on to item 8, consent agenda for certification enforcement actions. Again, does anyone wish to have anything pulled from the consent? Hearing none, then do I have a motion to approve items 8A, 1 through 9, 8B, 1 to 5, and 8C, 1 to 5?
So moved.
Member Baker, do I have a second?
Second.
Member Broussard, second. Comments, questions, concerns? All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Fantastic, thank you. Then we will move on to Call to the public, item 9. Same rules as recently indicated apply. So, Director Williams, you've indicated we have 2 folks who want to address the board.
First up, we have James Gustafson, followed by Bill Holder.
Thank you.
Looks like James is no longer here, so Bill Holder.
Thank you. Thank you, members of the board. I am Attorney Bill Holder. I represent Julie Humble, who is item 10A3 on your agenda for a negotiated settlement agreement whereby she agrees to a 1-year suspension of her certificate, including the condition of a classroom management class to be approved by board staff. In case you wonder why I'm speaking at all when I'm in favor of you accepting the agreement, the reason is that I don't know whether any of you will ask to move this item from the consent agenda and discuss it, and in that event I don't know whether I'll be able to address you, so out of an abundance of caution I want to give you my 2.5 minutes by now worth on that subject. Ms., we do advocate that you should accept the negotiated settlement agreement. By way of explanation, let me tell you 3 things. Number 1, and going backward in terms of time, number 1, you should know that Ms. Humble is currently employed at a charter school which does not require a certificate, that is a legacy traditional school. However, the school will not employ her if she has a suspended certificate. So just in case you wonder if you're concerned that she's getting a punishment or not, she is. The moment you pass this agreement, she will lose her job and she'll be unemployed. As a practical matter, she'll likely be unemployed for 2 school years because they're not likely to hire her mid-school year next year. So that's point, and that's despite the fact that she has more than satisfactory evaluations there at Legacy. The second thing that I want to bring to your attention is this, that with regard to the allegations against her in school year 2017-18 in Pendergast, you will note that they are all hearsay allegations. In other words, they come from a colleague or a parent who says what a student will say. More importantly, however, they were never Ms. Humble was never confronted with these allegations. She was placed on administrative leave in Pendergast. Despite requests, she was never told what the allegations against her were. Because she did not have what I consider, obviously, the benefit of legal counsel, she didn't know that she had any hearing rights. As a result, when she was not told what the allegations against her were, she resigned. That's the explanation for why she resigned mid-year. She would have offered evidence denying the allegations and at least mitigating the circumstances in some. Last and third, she was employed with regard to allegations in the Washington School District. Yes, she was employed for 27 years as a teacher in Washington School District, and yes, there were some complaints made against her in the course of those years. What you should also know is that her evaluations throughout those 27 years were more than outstanding. She was Teacher of the Year of the Month twice and received a Lifetime Achievement Award in that district. I'm out of my 3 minutes, so I'll yield. I do ask you to approve the settlement agreement.
Thank you.
Dr. Core, members of the board, that concludes item 9, call to the public.
I'm going to move on to item 10 then, General Session Certification Enforcement Actions. I understand that Member Broussard would like a discussion of 10A3. Therefore, do I have a motion to approve items 10A1, 10A2, and 10A4?
So moved.
Member Baker, do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, Member Ruiz. No, fair enough. Fair enough. Any other conversation on 10A1, 2, or 4? All approval indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Item 10A3, Member Broussard.
Well, I'm sorry. Thank you, Vice President Core, and members. As I read this, I had a lot of concerns because there were so many different instances. And from what I understand, this did not go to PPAC. That is correct.
Dr. Core, Member Broussard, that is correct. Negotiated settlements do not go to PPAC.
So I am actually not happy with the 1 year. I don't think it's enough. I don't think a course for her, I don't know, but I hesitate to believe that a course in classroom management when you already have 27 plus years of experience in the classroom, it seems a little more habitual to me. So I would just like to recommend that this case in particular go before PPAC and get their recommendation on that. Thank you.
Other thoughts or comments? Yeah, Member Kay.
Dr. Court, Superintendent Hoffman, members, I actually had the same concerns. It seemed like there was a pattern of behavior here, a long history, and my initial reaction was 1 year seems to be probably too lenient, and I don't know that classroom management is going to change this behavior, so I would concur with sending it to PPAC.
Member Burton.
I as well. I had the similar concerns.
Any other thoughts? So we really have two choices here. Do I have a motion to deny the negotiated settlement agreement of Julie Humble and direct staff to schedule Ms. Humble for a PPAC hearing in the near future?
That would be my motion. So moved.
Do I have a second to that motion?
Second.
Any additional discussion or conversation? And just so we're clear before I call the vote, we're calling to deny the negotiated settlement and send to PPAC, just so everyone's clear on what they're voting for. All in favor of that motion, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. Going to move on to 10D. This is presentation, discussion, and possible action on findings of fact, conclusions of law, recommendation of the Professional Practices Advisory Committee. We normally go right to motions.
Dr. Core, members of the board, that's correct. Typically, the board just goes right to motions unless a board member has a question for staff on one of the PPAC cases.
But I believe you've coached me that it's important that I read the motion, right?
Correct, Dr. Core.
Okay.
You need to read
All right.
the motion.
I do follow directions. So for item 10B1, do I have a motion to adopt the findings of fact, conclusions of law, and recommendations of the PPAC and revoke the teaching certificates for Richard Bonet, and that all states and territories be so notified?
So moved.
Member Mack, do I have a second?
Second.
Member Burton. Any conversation? All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay. 10B2, passed obviously. 10B2, do I have a motion to adapt the findings of fact, conclusions of law, and recommendations of the PPAC and revoke the teaching certificates for Michael O'Boyle, and that all states and territories be so notified?
So moved.
Member Broussard, do I have a second?
Second.
Member Burton, any conversation? Okay, all in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion passes. 10B3, do I have a motion to adapt the finding of fact, conclusions of law, and recommendations of the PPAC and revoke the teaching certificates of Deborah Schmidt, and that all states and territories be so notified?
So moved.
Thank you, Member Burton. Do I have a second?
Such.
Member Baker, thank you. Any conversations or discussion? All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Then we will move on to 10B4. Do I have a motion to adapt the findings of fact, conclusions of law, and recommendations of the PPAC and suspend the teaching certificates of Angela Sanders for a period of 2 years with the completion of an alcohol prevention course approved by board staff, and that all states and territories be so notified? Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Member Broussard. Do I have a second?
Second.
Member Kay, thank you. Any conversation or discussion? All in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Fantastic. Then just a quick reminder that the board will have a study session after lunch on school improvement presented by Arizona Department of Ed staff. Also, we will postpone, as I understand it, the executive committee of the board until the 28th of October. Is that correct?
That is correct, Dr. Kaur. This is item 11, summary of current events and future meeting. So we will adjourn this state board meeting when Dr. Kaur says it's adjourned, and then we'll go eat lunch. And then for those of you who are staying for the study session, we'll come back out here. The time is 1:10. I don't know if the board members would like a half hour for lunch or an hour for lunch. You tell me. Half hour for lunch. Eat very quickly.
Hey, folks working in education can't wait to get a half hour for lunch. We're not used to a half hour
also
for
true.
lunch. So with that, Luke, just know you are in our thoughts, Luke, and I will adjourn this meeting at 1:10 p.m. Thank you very much.
Thank you.